I am Kendra, 35 years old, and a year after my brutal divorce, my ex-mother-in-law spotted me in a hospital waiting room. Clutching a designer baby bag, she marched up to me with a smug, victorious smile and announced that leaving me was the best decision her son ever made. She said he finally had the perfect baby boy with my former best friend. I did not scream or cry. I simply took a sip of my coffee and asked if that was really what she believed. 10 minutes later, a specific man walked through those hospital doors, and all the arrogant color drained completely from her face. Before I share the details of this spectacular downfall, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. The heavy glass doors of the pediatric wing VIP lounge slid open, and the tranquil, hushed atmosphere of the room was instantly shattered. I was sitting on a plush, cream-colored sofa, reviewing quarterly financial projections on my tablet, when Brenda marched in. She was wearing a perfectly tailored emerald green suit that I knew cost more than her son's monthly mortgage. Over her arm hung an aggressively large Louis Vuitton baby bag, carried like a trophy rather than a practical item for an infant. She stopped dead in her tracks when her eyes landed on me. The fake pearls around her neck practically rattled as she let out a loud theatrical gasp, designed to draw the attention of every nurse and receptionist at the central desk. "What on earth is she doing up here?" Brenda demanded, not speaking to me but projecting her voice toward the terrified-looking head nurse, Maria. "This floor is reserved for private patients, families of substance. Why is this ghetto outcast loitering in the VIP lounge?" I did not flinch. I did not lower my head. I simply picked up my porcelain cup, took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso, and watched her. Brenda took my silence as submission. It was a mistake she had made countless times during the 5 years I was married to her precious son, Jamal. She closed the distance between us, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She stood over me, her face contorted into a mask of smug superiority. "Did you follow us?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "Are you really that pathetic, Kendra? Trailing after my son just to catch a glimpse of the happiness you could never give him?" Nurse Maria took a hesitant step forward, her eyes darting nervously toward me, waiting for a signal. I gave her a microscopic shake of my head. "Let Brenda speak. Give a fool enough rope and they will gladly tie the knot themselves." "You really have no shame," Brenda continued, adjusting the designer bag on her shoulder so the logo caught the light. "A whole year since the divorce, and you still cannot let go. Jamal is finally living the life he deserves. He has a beautiful home, a thriving career, and most importantly, a real woman who actually knows how to build a family." Jada stepped up to fulfill his manhood the moment she realized you were too broken and barren to do it yourself. Hearing my former best friend's name spoken with such triumphant reverence would have broken me 12 months ago. Jada had been my maid of honor. We had shared secrets, business plans, and late-night conversations about our futures. She was the one who held my hand in the clinic when the doctors delivered the devastating news about our chances of conceiving. I did not know then that she was using my vulnerability as a blueprint to tear down my marriage and slide perfectly into my place. But today, sitting in the sunlit luxury of the pediatric suite, I felt absolutely nothing but mild amusement. I crossed my legs, smoothing the fabric of my tailored navy trousers, and looked up at Brenda with a serene smile. "You seem very energized this morning, Brenda," I said, my voice completely level. "Though I suppose celebrating a newborn will do that to a grandmother. Congratulations on the new addition." My calm demeanor visibly irritated her. She wanted me hysterical. She wanted me weeping and begging for answers. "Do not patronize me," she spat. "You are just jealous. You thought you could trap my son with your fake corporate ambition and your cold, calculating personality. You spent all your time trying to build some little startup company while neglecting your duties as a wife. And look where it got you. Sitting alone in a hospital lobby while my son and his beautiful new family are checking into a luxury recovery suite." She turned back to Nurse Maria, slamming her hand on the reception desk. "I want her removed immediately," Brenda ordered, her voice echoing down the pristine hallway. My son is paying top dollar for privacy and exclusivity. We do not want this woman anywhere near our baby. Call security right now." Nurse Maria swallowed hard, looking genuinely panicked. She was not terrified of Brenda's aggressive demands. She was terrified because she knew exactly who I was, and she knew the catastrophic mistake Brenda was making by screaming at me in this particular building. I placed my espresso cup back onto its matching saucer with a soft, definitive clink. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the lounge. I looked at Brenda, taking in the desperation beneath her designer clothes. She was a woman obsessed with legacy, desperate to prove that her family was elite, sophisticated, and untouchable. She needed to put me down to elevate herself. I did not move to leave. I simply leaned back against the plush cushions, observing her frantic need for dominance just like I would watch a predictable television drama. Let her shout. Let her demand security. The real show had not even started yet. Brenda took a step closer, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the waiting area. She gestured wildly toward the closed double doors of the maternity suite down the hall. Behind those doors, she announced, her chest puffing out with absolute arrogance, is a healthy, perfect 8-pound baby boy, the heir to the Ellis family legacy, a legacy you almost ruined with your dried-up, empty womb. I kept my eyes locked on hers, my expression completely neutral, though the memory of those exact words tried to claw its way to the surface. It had been exactly 365 days since her son Jamal had packed his bags, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I was too broken to be a real wife. He had taken half of my life savings under the guise of an amicable split, claiming he needed the financial cushion to start over because my inability to conceive had traumatized him. I had cried until my lungs burned that day. I had begged him to stay. I had truly believed I was the problem. But Brenda was not finished twisting the knife. She leaned forward, the heavy scent of her designer perfume wafting over me, suffocating and sharp. "You should be thanking Jamal on your hands and knees," she spat. "He gave you 5 good years. He tolerated your obsession with that ridiculous healthcare tech startup of yours. He let you play CEO while you failed at the one biological duty a woman is actually supposed to perform. But a man has needs, Kendra. A man of Jamal's caliber needs to spread his seed to build his kingdom. He could not wait around forever for a barren mistake to magically fix herself." I slowly crossed one leg over the other, resting my tablet on my lap. The screen glowed with the quarterly reports of the very company she was currently mocking, the company that had just gone public and turned me into a multimillionaire. But Brenda did not know that. To her, I was still the discarded, pathetic ex-wife who had lost everything. And thank God for Jada. Brenda continued, clapping her hands together as if praising the heavens. Hearing that name still sent a brief electric shock through my system. Jada, my college roommate. The woman who had stood beside me at the altar holding my bouquet while I pledged my life to Jamal. The woman who had come over with wine and takeout every time a fertility test came back negative, holding me while I sobbed on my living room floor. Jada knew exactly what it took to fulfill his manhood. Brenda gloated, completely unaware of the absolute poison spilling from her lips. She did not waste time playing boss. She stepped up and gave my son the family he always deserved. She upgraded his life while you were busy drowning in your own self-pity. They are soulmates, Kendra, and now they have a beautiful son to prove it. So I am asking you one last time. Take whatever shred of dignity you have left and crawl out of this hospital before my son walks out here and sees the woman who almost destroyed his life." The sheer audacity of her monologue was breathtaking. She stood there wrapped in a false sense of righteousness, weaponizing my deepest insecurities in the middle of a hospital corridor. A year ago, this speech would have shattered me into a million unrecognizable pieces. I would have run out of the building blinded by tears, apologizing for my very existence. Instead, I simply smiled. It was a small, chilling smile that did not quite reach my eyes. Brenda recoiled slightly, her confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. She had expected a breakdown. She had expected me to scream, to throw my coffee, to cause the kind of scene that would validate her belief that I was nothing more than an unhinged, bitter woman. My silence unnerved her. When I did not move a single muscle, Brenda's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. She spun around her heels, skidding slightly on the marble, and slammed her hand flat against the elevated reception desk. "Nurse Maria," she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "I told you to call security 5 minutes ago. Why is this woman still sitting here? I want her physically removed from this floor. This wing is for VIP patients only. My son paid an exorbitant amount of money to ensure his new family would not be harassed by ghetto trash. Call the guards right now or I will have your job." The reaction of the hospital staff was a masterclass in silent panic. Nurse Maria, a veteran healthcare worker who had seen every kind of family drama imaginable, did not reach for the phone. She did not call for backup. Instead, she stood completely frozen behind the mahogany desk, her face drained of all color. But Maria was not looking at Brenda. She was staring directly at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and profound respect. The two junior nurses standing behind her had literally stopped breathing, clutching their clipboards against their chests, as if trying to shrink into the walls. Brenda, blinded by her own self-importance, completely misread the room. She thought they were intimidated by her loud voice and her aggressive posturing. She thought her empty threats about getting them fired carried actual weight. "Did you hear me?" Brenda demanded, snapping her fingers in front of Maria's face. "I said call security. Grab her by the arms and throw her out onto the street. She has no right to be in a private paid suite." Maria swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to die on her tongue. She looked at Brenda, then looked back at me silently, pleading for permission on how to handle this spectacularly escalating disaster. I let the uncomfortable, heavy silence stretch for a few more agonizing seconds. I wanted Brenda to feel the shift in the atmosphere. I wanted her to notice that nobody was rushing to do her bidding. I wanted her to feel the invisible crushing weight of true power before the floor completely dropped out from beneath her. I finally gave Nurse Maria a slow, deliberate nod, granting her the permission she was so desperately seeking. But before Maria could utter a single syllable, the heavy oak doors of the maternity suite clicked open, and the sound of a newborn crying drifted into the lounge. Brenda instantly whipped around her face, transforming from a furious scowl into a beaming, triumphant smile. "Oh, here they are," she announced loudly, making sure her voice carried across the entire room. "Here is my beautiful family." Jamal stepped out into the waiting area, pushing a high-end bassinet with Jada clinging possessively to his arm. He looked exactly the same as the day he walked out on me. He wore a crisp, tailored suit, his hair perfectly lined up, projecting the image of a successful, wealthy family man who had the world at his fingertips. Jada leaned against him, wrapped in a luxurious cashmere cardigan, looking like the picture of exhausted, glowing motherhood. They stopped in the middle of the corridor when they saw me sitting on the sofa. Jamal's confident stride vanished. He froze, his hands gripping the handle of the bassinet so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jada let out a small, sharp gasp, her eyes darting nervously toward Brenda and then back to me. Jamal's initial shock quickly morphed into deep, familiar arrogance. He puffed out his chest, stepping in front of Jada and the baby in a pathetic display of masculine protection. A cruel smirk spread across his face as he locked eyes with me, clearly gearing up to deliver the final crushing blow. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash an insult about my lonely, empty life, ready to finish the job his mother had started. Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed down the pristine hospital corridor. He released his grip on the high-end bassinet and wrapped his arm possessively around Jada's waist, pulling her close against his chest. He looked at me with the exact same expression of arrogant pity he had worn the day he handed me divorce papers. "Well, look who it is," Jamal sneered, shaking his head slowly, as if he were looking at a tragic accident. "I told my mother she was seeing things, but I should have known better." "You really are sitting out here, Kendra. Are you seriously stalking my family?" I did not respond immediately. I let my eyes drift from Jamal to Jada. My former best friend refused to meet my gaze. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and looked down at the floor, clutching the edge of her cashmere cardigan. This was the woman who had stood in my kitchen drinking my wine, wiping away my tears, when the fertility clinic called with bad news. This was the woman who had told me Jamal was a fool if he could not see my worth, only to slip into his bed the moment my back was turned. Kendra, you really should not be here, Jada said, her voice dripping with a fake breathy sweetness that made my skin crawl. It is not healthy for you to obsess over us like this. Jamal and I are starting our new life together. We just want peace. You need to move on and find your own happiness. Jamal nodded in agreement, puffing his chest out even further. He pointed a manicured finger in my direction. I told you a year ago, Kendra. A real man needs a legacy. He needs a family. You could not give me that. You were too broken, too focused on playing boss at some little startup company that was going nowhere. I needed a real woman to build my kingdom. Jada stepped up. She gave me my son. Now take whatever dignity you have left and get off this floor before I call security and have you dragged out of here like a trespasser. His words were meant to crush me. A year ago they would have. A year ago, Jamal had drained our joint accounts, taking half of my life savings, right when my healthcare technology company was struggling to secure its first major round of funding. He had left me financially devastated and emotionally shattered, kicking me out of our home and loudly telling anyone who would listen that my barren womb was the reason his marriage had failed. He had painted himself as the tragic hero, and me as the defective villain. But I had not drowned in the tears he left behind. I had used that profound betrayal as fuel. I worked 20-hour days. I secured the venture capital. I took my company public, and I built an empire while he was busy playing house with a traitor. I looked at Jamal taking in his tailored suit and his desperate need to feel superior. He honestly believed he had won. He believed that because he had a child, he was somehow standing on higher ground. Is that what you believe, Jamal? I asked, my voice completely steady, void of any anger or sorrow. Do you really believe you upgraded your life? Before Jamal could formulate another insult, the heavy mahogany doors of the hospital administration suite swung open with a loud thud. Mr. Harrison, the senior hospital administrator, stepped hurriedly into the corridor. He was a man who usually moved with measured, bureaucratic calm, but right now he was walking with a frantic, nervous energy. He held a leather-bound folio tight against his chest, his eyes darting around the lounge until they landed on our group. Brenda immediately seized the opportunity. She stood up taller, gesturing wildly toward me. "Ah, the administrator," she announced loudly, making sure Jamal and Jada could see her taking charge of the situation. "It is about time management showed up. I demand that you have this woman removed from the premises immediately. We are paying top dollar for this VIP maternity suite, and I will not have my family subjected to the harassment of a bitter ex-wife." Jamal nodded approvingly, stepping away from Jada to meet the administrator. He reached into his suit jacket, clearly preparing to pull out his wallet and throw his weight around. "Listen to my mother," Jamal said, his voice taking on a demanding, entitled edge. "I am Jamal Ellis. I booked the luxury recovery package on this floor. I expect a premium level of security for my wife and my newborn son. This woman is a direct threat to our peace, and I want her escorted out of the building." Mr. Harrison did not even break his stride. He did not look at Brenda. He did not look at Jamal's outstretched hand. He walked right past them, as if they were nothing more than invisible statues cluttering his hallway. He stopped directly in front of the sofa where I was sitting. He smoothed the front of his suit jacket, took a deep breath, and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. "Madam Founder," Mr. Harrison said, his voice clear and resonant in the suddenly silent room, "I sincerely apologize for the disturbance. I was reviewing the final acquisition paperwork in my office when I heard the commotion in the lounge." He turned his head slightly, casting a brief, disdainful glance at Brenda and Jamal before looking back at me with complete deference. "Should we have security escort them out of your private wing?" The silence that crashed down over the lounge was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a bomb detonation right before the shockwave tears everything apart. Brenda's mouth fell open. Her jaw practically unhinged as the words washed over her. "Madam Founder, your private wing." Her eyes darted wildly from the administrator to me, trying to process a reality that her arrogant mind simply could not accept. The designer baby bag slipped slightly from her shoulder, bumping against her hip. Jamal froze completely. The smug, victorious smirk that had been plastered across his face just seconds ago vanished, entirely replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His hand, still reaching into his jacket for his wallet, dropped limply to his side. He stared at Mr. Harrison, his eyes wide, waiting for the punchline, waiting for someone to laugh and correct this massive, impossible misunderstanding. But there was no punchline. There was only me sitting comfortably on my plush sofa in the exact center of the pediatric wing that bore my name. I took one last sip of my espresso, the dark, rich coffee tasting sweeter than it ever had before. I looked directly into Brenda's terrified eyes and offered a slow, deliberate smile. The silence in the room only lasted a few seconds before Jamal's fragile ego overrode his initial shock. The panic in his eyes hardened into furious indignation. He let go of the bassinet, took 2 heavy steps toward the reception desk, and glared at Mr. Harrison. He let out a harsh, barking laugh, shaking his head, as if the hospital administrator had just told a terrible joke. "Are you out of your mind?" Jamal demanded, his voice booming through the quiet lounge. "Madam Founder, did she pay you to say that? Because I know exactly who that woman is. That is my bitter leftover ex-wife. When I walked out on her a year ago, she was sobbing on the floor of a half-empty apartment because I legally secured every single valuable asset we owned. She does not own a hospital wing. She barely owns the clothes on her back." Brenda immediately seized the lifeline her son threw her. She straightened her posture, gripping her designer bag tightly. "Exactly," Brenda chimed in, stepping up beside Jamal. "My son is a senior executive. He is a man of immense wealth and standing in this community. He specifically requested the VIP maternity package to ensure his new perfect family would not be subjected to this kind of ghetto harassment." "You are speaking to the wrong person, Mr. Harrison." Jamal did not wait for the administrator to respond. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket with aggressive flair. He pulled out a sleek black leather wallet and extracted a heavy metal platinum credit card. He slammed the card down onto the polished marble reception desk with a sharp, echoing smack. He slapped his hand flat over the card, leaning his weight onto the counter, trying to physically dominate the hospital official. "Listen to me very carefully," Jamal commanded, jutting his chin out. "I booked the absolute top-tier recovery suite on this floor. I am paying for exclusivity. I am paying for privacy. I want this woman removed from my paid area immediately. If you do not have security drag her out of here in the next 30 seconds, I will call the hospital board of directors and personally ensure you are standing in the unemployment line by tomorrow morning." I remained perfectly still on the sofa. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice to correct his loud, pathetic boasts about leaving me destitute. I just watched him perform. Jamal had always used money as a weapon. During our divorce, he had hidden funds, manipulated joint accounts, and used high-priced lawyers to drain my savings, all while telling the judge that my failure to give him a child had caused him severe emotional distress. He thought stripping my bank accounts would break my spirit. He never realized that taking everything from me only removed my fear of losing. Jada pushed the bassinet slightly forward, stepping into the light. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet expression of manufactured pity. She reached out and stroked Jamal's shoulder, playing the role of the devoted, supportive wife. "Kendra, please." Jada sighed softly, making sure her voice sounded gentle and reasonable for the hospital staff. "Just stop. You are embarrassing yourself. Jamal is a provider. He takes care of his real family. You trying to bribe a hospital worker to call you a founder is just sad. We understand you are hurting because you could never give him a son, but you need to accept that he upgraded his life." Jada looked at Jamal, her eyes wide and adoring. "Just pay whatever extra fee they need to get her out of our sight, baby. Our son needs to rest in his suite. We do not need this negative energy around our blessing." Jamal puffed out his chest, completely inflated by Jada's stroke to his ego. He tapped his index finger aggressively against the platinum card resting on the marble. "You heard my woman," Jamal said to Mr. Harrison. "Swipe the card. Add a penalty fee to my tab if you have to. Just get security up here and throw the trash out." I let out a soft, genuine chuckle. The sound cut through their aggressive posturing, drawing their eyes back to me. Jamal's jaw clenched. Brenda glared daggers. Jada instinctively pulled the bassinet an inch closer to her body. Mr. Harrison did not look at the platinum card. He did not look at Jamal. He maintained his perfectly straight posture, turning his attention back to me. I caught his eye and gave him a single deliberate nod. "Proceed," I said quietly. Mr. Harrison turned to his computer terminal. He typed a few quick keystrokes. The heavy silence in the room was broken only by the soft hum of the laser printer behind the reception desk. Mr. Harrison pulled a crisp white sheet of paper from the tray. He placed it inside a sleek, dark blue hospital folder. He turned back to face Jamal. He did not reach for the platinum credit card. Instead, he slid the dark blue folder across the smooth marble counter, stopping it right next to Jamal's hand. "Sir," Mr. Harrison said, his voice completely devoid of emotion, operating with the terrifying politeness of a man holding all the power. "Before we discuss who is legally permitted to occupy this private wing, we need to address your outstanding balance." Jamal scoffed, rolling his eyes as he snatched the folder off the counter. He flipped it open with a dramatic, annoyed flick of his wrist. "I told you to just put it on the card!" Jamal snapped, his eyes dropping to the printed page. "I do not care what the premium costs. I told you I am paying for." Jamal's voice abruptly died in his throat. The arrogant words simply stopped. He stared at the piece of paper, his eyes widening so fast I thought they might pop out of his skull. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. His confident posture crumpled in an instant. He stood completely frozen, staring at the bottom line of the invoice, unable to comprehend the numbers printed in bold black ink. Jamal's hands shook visibly. The crisp white paper trembled against the dark blue folder. Mr. Harrison did not offer him a single moment of grace. "As you can see, sir, the total balance for your 5-day stay in the Elite Recovery Suite comes to exactly $150,000. The collective gasp from Brenda and Jada was loud enough to be heard down the hall. Brenda clutched her fake pearls, her mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. 150,000, Jamal choked out his voice, cracking and jumping an octave higher than normal. He slammed the folder back onto the marble counter. "This is extortion. This is a hospital, not a luxury resort. I provided my premium health insurance card when we checked in. My coverage is flawless. I have the highest tier plan available." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, his expression remaining a mask of professional apathy. "Your insurance is indeed premium for standard medical facilities, Mr. Ellis. However, this specific pediatric and maternity wing operates entirely independently from the main hospital's billing network. It is an exclusive, strictly out-of-network luxury recovery center. You signed the financial liability waiver upon admission, acknowledging that any uncovered costs would be your direct out-of-pocket responsibility." Jamal looked like he was about to vomit. The aggressive chest-puffing swagger he had carried into the room had completely evaporated. The money he had drained from our joint accounts a year ago was substantial, but he had spent the last 12 months buying a sprawling new house, leasing a luxury car, and funding Jada's extravagant lifestyle to prove to everyone that he was a king. I knew his financial habits better than he did. He absolutely did not have $150,000 in liquid cash, just sitting in a checking account ready to be swiped. Jada, clearly misinterpreting Jamal's frozen silence as mere annoyance rather than absolute financial terror, pushed the bassinet closer. She reached out and stroked his arm, her voice dripping with misplaced, arrogant confidence. "Baby, do not even argue with this man," Jada sneered, shooting a glaring look at Mr. Harrison before turning her venom back to me. "Just swipe the card. Pay whatever ridiculous fee they want so this bitter ex-wife can finally crawl back to whatever miserable hole she came from. She is just sitting there waiting for you to fail, Jamal. Do not give her the satisfaction of seeing you hesitate." Jamal flinched violently at her touch. He stared down at his platinum credit card resting on the marble counter as if it were a live grenade. But Jada was on a roll. Emboldened by the sound of her own voice and desperate to assert her dominance, she stepped right up to the edge of the sofa where I sat. She looked down at me, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pity and triumph. "You really have not learned a single thing, have you, Kendra?" Jada mocked, crossing her arms tightly over her cashmere sweater. You are sitting here with your little tablet still crunching numbers, still pretending you are some big-time executive. That was always your biggest problem. Your entire marriage was just another business transaction to you. I rested my hands quietly on my lap, letting her dig her own grave. The nurses behind the desk watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. I used to sit in your kitchen and listen to Jamal complain about how incredibly cold you were. Jada continued, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet lounge. You were completely unlovable. You would work 20-hour days on that ridiculous healthcare startup of yours, staring at spreadsheets until 3 in the morning while your husband slept alone. You neglected him. You neglected your home. You were so obsessed with playing the corporate boss that your body just shut down and refused to give him a child. Brenda nodded vigorously behind her, clearly thrilled that Jada was delivering the exact speech she had wanted to finish earlier. Jamal did not want a business partner, Jada declared, resting a protective hand on her flat stomach. He wanted a traditional home. He needed a real woman. Someone warm, someone who actually knew how to nurture and love him. I gave him the warmth you never possessed. I gave him a son. And you are so jealous it is literally eating you alive. The irony of her words was almost too delicious to bear. Jada was standing there mocking my late nights, insulting my endless dedication to my startup, completely unaware that the very healthcare technology company she was currently dismissing was the exact reason this ultra-luxury privately funded maternity wing even existed. She was mocking the spreadsheets that had generated the generational wealth she so desperately wanted to claim through Jamal. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly level. I did not raise my tone. I did not show a single ounce of the hurt she was so desperately trying to provoke. Jada scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. I am just telling you the truth. Now Jamal is going to pay this bill, and you are going to sit there and watch security throw you out. Go ahead, baby. Swipe the card. Show her. Jamal did not move. Heavy beads of sweat had visibly formed on his forehead, catching the bright overhead lights. He looked from his mother to Jada, and then down at the platinum card. He knew exactly what would happen if Mr. Harrison ran that piece of plastic. It would decline. The humiliation of having his card rejected for insufficient funds in front of his mother, his new woman, and the ex-wife he had just boasted to would completely destroy the fragile, wealthy facade he had spent a year building. There has to be a mistake, Jamal stammered, his voice dropping to a desperate bargaining whisper as he turned back to Mr. Harrison. I demand a payment plan, or I need to speak with the billing department immediately. I am not paying $150,000 in one lump sum today. That is completely unreasonable. Mr. Harrison maintained his stoic posture. He picked up the platinum card from the marble counter, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, examining it as if it were a cheap novelty item. I am afraid payment plans are not an option for this specific wing. Mr. Ellis. Mr. Harrison stated, his tone as hard and unyielding as the floor beneath us. Payment in full is required prior to discharge. If this card cannot cover the balance, we will need to explore alternative asset liquidations or involve our legal recovery team. Jamal swallowed audibly. Brenda stepped forward, her previous arrogance entirely replaced by mounting confusion. Jamal, what is the problem? She asked, her voice tight and nervous. Just put it on the black card. Let us pay these thieves and go home. Mom, be quiet. Jamal snapped, the crushing stress finally cracking his carefully polished exterior. He slammed his fist against the desk, leaning aggressively toward Mr. Harrison, trying to use anger to mask his absolute terror. I want to speak to the owner of this facility, right now. I want the board of directors on the phone. This is a scam, and I will not be extorted by some desk clerk. Mr. Harrison did not flinch. He slowly placed the platinum card back onto the counter. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of professional courtesy and absolute disdain. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, stagnant air of the VIP lounge. I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding regarding the ownership and operation of this facility. I stood up slowly, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my navy trousers. I walked toward the reception desk, the sharp click of my heels commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. I stopped a few feet away from Jamal and Jada, looking directly into my former best friend's wide, nervous eyes. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Jada," I began, my tone conversational and light. I was entirely obsessed with my work. I did stare at spreadsheets until 3 in the morning. I neglected the traditional domestic duties you so eagerly stepped in to perform behind my back. But you see, those late nights and that absolute obsession actually paid off. That little healthcare tech startup you and Jamal loved to laugh at went public 6 months ago. And with my first major round of founders' equity, I decided to make a rather substantial charitable donation to the city. I gestured gracefully around the pristine marble-lined corridor, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the custom artwork. "I bought this entire wing," I stated clearly. "I funded the state-of-the-art incubators, the luxury recovery suites, and the specialized pediatric staff. You are currently standing in the Kendra Ellis Pediatric Center. I am the primary benefactor and the sole owner of this private facility." Jamal's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jada took a physical step backward, bumping hard into the bassinet, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The sheer magnitude of her miscalculation washed over her face, draining away the last remnants of her smug arrogance. So I continued, turning my attention back to the hospital administrator. "As the owner, I reserve the right to waive the recovery fees for any patient facing genuine financial hardship. However, I absolutely do not extend that courtesy to men who steal from their wives to fund their mistresses." Jamal's face flushed a deep, violent shade of red. The embarrassment was suffocating him, but his massive ego refused to let him surrender. He slapped his hand down on the platinum card again, pushing it forcefully across the marble counter toward Mr. Harrison. "Run the card!" Jamal barked, his voice trembling with a desperate, manic edge. "Run the damn card right now. I have millions in that account. I do not need your charity, Kendra. I do not need anything from you. I will buy this whole floor just to fire you." Mr. Harrison looked down at the card, completely unmoved by the outburst. He looked back at me, waiting for my instruction. I let out a soft sigh, shaking my head with genuine pity. "I would not bother swiping that, Mr. Harrison. The machine is just going to decline it." Jamal sneered, his chest heaving as he pointed an aggressive finger at me. "My card does not decline. It has no limit." "It does not have a limit," I agreed easily, "but it does have a federal hold on it. That specific platinum card is tied to your primary offshore investment account, is it not, Jamal? The exact same account where you illegally transferred half of my life savings during our divorce, claiming it was your hard-earned capital." Jamal's eyes darted frantically. His arrogant posture collapsed, his broad shoulders instantly hunching forward, as if an invisible weight had just been dropped on his back. "When you took that money," I explained, relishing every single syllable of his destruction, "you forgot that I built the financial tracking software your own accounting firm utilizes. You also forgot to declare those redirected funds to the federal government. My forensic accountant submitted a very detailed, highly anonymous tip to the Internal Revenue Service last month. They froze that specific account exactly 48 hours ago, pending a full, devastating audit." Jamal looked like he had been physically struck by a freight train. He stared at the piece of plastic on the counter as if it had turned into a venomous snake. His mouth worked silently, trying to form a defense that simply did not exist. He knew I was right. The realization that he was completely broke, standing in a hospital wing owned by the woman he had discarded, shattered him in real time. Jada grabbed Jamal's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "Jamal, what is she talking about?" Jada demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. "Tell her she is lying. We just closed on the new house. How are we going to pay the mortgage?" Jamal could not even look at her. He stared blankly at the floor, completely paralyzed by his own financial ruin. But Brenda was not finished. She had built her entire identity on the illusion of her family's superiority, and she was absolutely refusing to let me tear it down. She shoved her way past Jamal, aggressively snatching the useless platinum card off the reception desk and shoving it hard into his chest. "Do not listen to this jealous, barren woman," Brenda shouted, her voice echoing wildly down the hall. "She is just trying to embarrass you because she knows she will never be half the mother Jada is. If she wants her extortion money so badly, we will give it to her. We do not need her, and we certainly do not need her pathetic charity." Brenda whipped her gold-plated smartphone out of her designer bag, her fingers tapping furiously against the screen. She looked at me with a wild, desperate sort of triumph, determined to play her ultimate trump card. You think you have won because of some minor tax mistake, Brenda spat, her face contorted with malice. My family is elite, Kendra. We have resources you cannot even fathom. I am calling Greg. Greg, Brenda's wealthy white son-in-law, the man married to Jamal's older sister. Greg was a real estate mogul whose family owned half the commercial properties in the city. Brenda had spent years bragging about Greg's generational wealth, constantly using his status and his race to elevate her own social standing at country club dinners. Greg has actual legitimate money, Brenda announced loudly to the entire waiting room, making sure the nurses heard her declare her salvation. He will wire the $150,000 right now. He will bring it in cash if he has to. He takes care of this family. We will pay your ridiculous fee, and then we will sue this hospital for harassment. She pressed the phone to her ear, shooting me a glare filled with pure, unfiltered hatred. She expected me to shrink back. She expected the mention of Greg's formidable wealth and power to intimidate me into backing down and letting them leave with their pride intact. Instead, I felt a bright, sharp spark of anticipation ignite in my chest. I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the reception desk. A slow, deeply amused smile spread across my face. "Oh, please call Greg," I said, my voice ringing out clearly over the sound of the ringing phone. "I have something I need to ask him anyway." The echo of my challenge had barely settled against the marble walls when the polished silver doors of the VIP elevator chimed perfectly on cue. The heavy doors slid open with a soft, mechanical hiss, and out stepped Tasha. Jamal's fiercely arrogant, desperately flashy older sister had arrived. Tasha walked into the maternity wing as if she were stepping onto a runway, completely oblivious to the suffocating tension already choking the room. She was wrapped entirely in loudly branded designer labels, acting as a walking billboard for new money insecurity. Her oversized, diamond-encrusted sunglasses rested on the bridge of her nose despite being completely indoors. She carried a massive, ridiculously expensive boutique gift bag in one hand, while her other hand clutched a custom leather purse that cost more than most people made in a year. Her stiletto heels clicked aggressively against the floor, demanding that every nurse, doctor, and patient within earshot acknowledge her incredibly important presence. Brenda let out a loud theatrical sigh of relief. Jamal physically slumped, his shoulders dropping as if a military cavalry had just breached the doors to save him from enemy fire. Tasha was their ultimate weapon, the supposed crown jewel of the Ellis family. Tasha strutted past the reception desk without even glancing at Mr. Harrison. She aimed her bright, blinding smile toward Jada and the bassinet practically vibrating with performative excitement. But before she could reach the sofa, her gaze shifted. She saw me standing there perfectly calm in my tailored navy trousers. Tasha stopped dead in her tracks. She slowly lowered her oversized sunglasses, resting them on the tip of her nose so she could glare at me over the rims. Her smile instantly melted into a sneer of absolute disgust. "What in the world is this?" Tasha demanded, her voice loud and grating, slicing through the quiet elegance of the VIP lounge. "Mom, why is Jamal's bitter leftover standing anywhere near my new nephew? Are we letting absolute peasants into the private suites now?" Brenda rushed to her daughter's side, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This woman is trying to extort us, Tasha. She is working with this hospital clerk to hold your brother hostage over some fake, fraudulent medical bill. I was just about to call Greg to come down here and pay these thieves in cash so we can have security throw her onto the street." Tasha let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She handed her massive gift bag to a bewildered Jamal and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. She looked me up and down, her eyes raking over my understated clothes and natural hair, with manufactured pity. "Look at you, Kendra." Tasha sighed, shaking her head. "You look absolutely exhausted. I guess realizing that your ex-husband upgraded to a younger, more fertile woman really takes a toll on the skin. And what is going on with this hair? You look like you just rolled out of bed to come beg for attention. I always told Jamal you never knew how to present yourself like a woman of status." I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. I just let her talk, knowing that people like Tasha always hung themselves if you just gave them enough rope. You really have a miserable, empty life, do you not? Tasha sneered, taking another step closer, trying to physically intimidate me. You could not keep my brother happy. You could not give our family a child. And now you are so desperate for relevance that you are stalking us at a hospital. It is pathetic, Kendra. You are pathetic. You need to accept that you were always just a temporary charity case. You were a peasant trying to sit at the table of a legacy family. I maintained my completely unbothered posture. A legacy family. That was Tasha's favorite phrase. She loved to pretend that the Ellis family was royalty, when in reality their parents had declared bankruptcy twice before Jamal married me. The only reason Tasha had any money to her name was because she had managed to manipulate Greg into marrying her. "Put your phone away, Mom," Tasha ordered, waving a dismissive hand at Brenda. "You do not need to bother Greg with this trash. My husband is a high-powered real estate developer. He is currently downtown closing a multi-million-dollar commercial property deal. He is a man of actual substance and immense wealth. He does not have the time to drive all the way to a hospital just to deal with Jamal's obsessed ex-wife." Tasha crossed her arms, jutting her chin out with supreme arrogance. "Greg takes care of his family. He provides a life of absolute luxury because he respects a woman who knows her place, a woman who knows how to be a wife. You never understood how to let a man lead, Kendra. You were always too busy playing boss to be a real partner. That is exactly why you are standing here alone with no husband, no baby, and no future, while we are celebrating a new generation of the Ellis legacy." Jada chimed in from the sofa, eager to support her sister-in-law. "Exactly, Tasha. I was just telling her the same thing. She is just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin our blessing because she is completely unlovable." Tasha smiled at Jada, a sickly sweet expression of solidarity. "Do not even worry about her, Jada. We are not going to let this miserable woman ruin my nephew's first day in the world. I will handle this." Tasha turned back to me, her eyes flashing with malice. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a sleek embossed checkbook. She clicked a gold pen with a sharp, aggressive sound. "Tell me how much this fake hospital bill is, Kendra," Tasha demanded, hovering her pen over the blank check. "I will write it right now. I will write it just to prove to you that my husband's bank account has more zeros than you will ever see in your entire pathetic life. I am going to write this check, and then I am going to personally watch hospital security drag you out the front doors by your cheap suit." I stood perfectly still. The corners of my mouth twitched upward into a genuine, terrifying smile. Jamal, who had been completely silent since his platinum card had been exposed as a frozen piece of plastic, suddenly looked panicked. He knew I never smiled like that unless I was holding a royal flush. "Are you quite sure you want to use that specific checking account, Tasha?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. Tasha scoffed, pressing the gold pen onto the paper. "It is Greg's primary business account. It has more than enough to cover whatever pennies you are trying to extort from my brother." I nodded slowly, taking a deliberate step toward her. "I am sure it did have enough, Tasha, right up until 9 o'clock this morning. But since you are so eager to brag about your husband's multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal, perhaps you should know who he was sitting across the table from when he signed those papers." Tasha's hand froze. The gold pen hovered over the checkbook. Her arrogant sneer faltered, replaced by a sudden sharp flicker of confusion. "What are you talking about?" Tasha demanded, her voice losing its aggressive volume. I tilted my head, looking at her with cold, calculated amusement. "I am talking about your perfect marriage. I am talking about your high-powered husband. And I am talking about the fact that Greg did not just buy a commercial property today, Tasha. He sold one. He sold his crown jewel asset because he is drowning in debt, and he sold it to me." Before she could form the words to call me a liar, the silver elevator doors chimed a second time. The heavy doors slid open, and out stepped the man of the hour. Greg. Tasha's white, immensely wealthy, high-powered husband had arrived, but the man walking into the VIP maternity lounge did not look like a master of the universe. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Greg's usually pristine complexion was a sickly pale shade of gray. His tailored charcoal suit looked suddenly too big for his frame. Heavy beads of sweat gathered at his temples and along his upper lip. He stumbled forward a half step, clutching a sleek leather briefcase to his chest, as if it were a bulletproof vest. He refused to look up. He stared rigidly at the polished marble floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. Tasha immediately spun around, her face lighting up with aggressive relief. She completely ignored his physical state, seeing only the human ATM she needed to save her family's pride. "Greg, honey." Tasha barked, her voice echoing shrilly down the corridor. "Tell this delusional woman she is out of her mind. Tell her you did not sell her anything. Tell her to take her fake hospital bill and shove it. We need $150,000 right now to get Jamal out of this extortion trap." I did not even look at Tasha. I let her loud, desperate demands bounce off the walls completely unacknowledged. My focus was entirely locked on Greg. I took a slow, measured step forward. The sharp click of my heels against the marble floor made Greg physically flinch. I took another step, deliberately crossing the invisible boundary of social politeness, stepping directly into his personal space. I stood tall, radiating the absolute terrifying dominance of a woman holding all the cards. Out of the corner of my eye, a sudden erratic movement caught my attention. It was Jada. The arrogant, loud-mouthed woman who had just spent the last 20 minutes insulting my career and boasting about her perfect new family, was suddenly shrinking into the far corner of the leather sofa. She was staring at Greg with eyes wide with raw, unfiltered terror. Jada wrapped both of her arms protectively around the bassinet, pulling it so tightly against her chest that the frame visibly shook. All the color had drained from her face. She looked like a cornered animal desperately trying to shield her young from an approaching predator. She was not looking at Jamal for protection. She was staring exclusively at Greg, her breathing ragged and uneven. The puzzle pieces shifted in my mind, forming a brilliant, scandalous picture. The primal fear in her eyes told a story that had absolutely nothing to do with unpaid hospital bills. But I filed that delicious secret away. Right now, I had a real estate mogul to break. "Hello, Greg," I said softly, keeping my voice low and smooth. "I am honestly surprised you had the stomach to show up here, especially after the incredibly difficult paperwork we finalized in my lawyer's office at 8 o'clock this morning." Greg swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, choking sound came out. He looked like he was about to vomit right there on the pristine floor of my pediatric center. He squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second before looking up, his gaze stopping at my collarbone because he was too terrified to look me in the eye. "Kendra," Greg choked out, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "Please, do not do this here." Tasha pushed herself between us, her designer perfume masking the scent of her husband's absolute panic. "Please," what Tasha demanded, slapping her husband's arm. "Greg, what is she talking about? Write the check. Show these peasants who we are." I smiled, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the room was suffocating. I tilted my head, looking down at the checkbook still clutched in Tasha's trembling hand. "He cannot write that check, Tasha," I explained, using the gentle, patronizing tone one might use to explain a simple concept to a very slow child. "Because if he writes a check for $150,000 from that account, it will bounce. Just like Jamal's platinum card." Tasha's jaw dropped. "That is a lie," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "Greg's family owns half this city." "They used to own half this city," I corrected smoothly, stepping around Tasha to keep my focus entirely on Greg. "Your husband over-leveraged his family's legacy years ago to fund your exorbitant lifestyle. The designer bags, the luxury cars, the endless trips to Europe. He took out massive high-interest loans against the commercial district to keep up appearances. And when the market shifted, he started quietly defaulting on every single one of them." Greg squeezed his eyes shut, a single bead of sweat rolling down his cheek. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching the edge of the reception desk to keep from collapsing. "The bank was going to foreclose on his crown jewel property next week." I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. "It would have triggered a chain reaction of bankruptcies that would have left him facing federal charges for bank fraud. I bought his debt, Tasha. I offered him a buyout. Your powerful, wealthy husband sold me the entire commercial block for pennies on the dollar this morning just to stay out of federal prison. Tasha spun around, staring at Greg with a look of absolute horror. Greg, she whispered, her voice finally losing its shrill edge. Tell me she is lying. Tell me we are not broke. Greg slowly lowered his head, staring back down at the marble floor. He did not say a word. His silence rang louder than any confession. He was completely destroyed, and he knew it. I took one step backward, putting a comfortable distance between myself and the wreckage of their lives. I looked over at Jamal, who was staring at his brother-in-law with a blank, uncomprehending expression. His lifeline, his ultimate financial backup plan, was entirely gone. So I said, clasping my hands together and turning my attention back to the hospital administrator, who had watched the entire scene with professional stoicism. Mr. Harrison, it appears the Ellis family is entirely out of funds. Please call security to escort them off my property. Mr. Harrison did not reach for the phone. He stood perfectly still behind the reception desk, his hands clasped together, watching the titans of local real estate crumble into dust. The silence in the VIP lounge was absolute, broken only by the ragged, panicked breathing coming from Greg. His usually imposing frame was suddenly shrunken. His expensive cologne could not mask the sharp, sour scent of pure fear radiating from his tailored charcoal suit. I reached across the smooth marble counter and picked up the dark blue hospital folder. The crisp white invoice detailing exactly $150,000 rested heavily inside. I turned my back on Jamal, completely dismissing his pathetic existence, and walked directly up to Greg. I invaded his personal space, stepping so close that he had to physically lean backward to avoid touching me. I pressed the dark blue folder flat against his chest. Greg flinched as if the cardboard burned through his shirt. Go ahead, Greg, I said, keeping my voice dangerously soft, yet projecting clearly enough for every single person in the room to hear. Tasha says you are good for it. She says you are a man of immense wealth. So pay the bill. Pay for your nephew. I let the word nephew hang in the stagnant air between us. I did not blink. I locked my eyes onto his, delivering a terrifying, lingering stare that stripped away every single one of his defenses. I let him see that I knew everything. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard. His eyes darted frantically past my shoulder, zeroing in on the far corner of the room. Behind me, Jada let out a sharp, involuntary whimper. She was pressing herself into the leather sofa, holding the bassinet so tightly her knuckles were turning white. She was not looking at Jamal for protection. She was staring exclusively at Greg, her breathing shallow and erratic. Tasha grabbed Greg's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the sleeve of his suit. Greg, what is she doing? Tasha demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. Hand me the checkbook. Write the check right now. Shut her up and let us leave. She is playing some kind of sick psychological game. Greg's hands shook uncontrollably. He could not maintain his grip. The dark blue folder slipped from his trembling fingers and hit the marble floor with a pathetic slap. He made no move to pick it up. He just stared at it, completely paralyzed by the reality of his own destruction. Tasha, Greg stammered, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of its usual booming authority. I cannot. My funds. Everything is tied up right now. It is all in escrow. We are heavily leveraged on the downtown properties. I do not have the liquidity for this. Tasha stared at her husband as if a complete stranger had just possessed his body. The man who had bought her a diamond tennis bracelet just because it was a Tuesday was standing in a luxury hospital wing, admitting he could not write a check. The foundation of her entire identity was cracking beneath her stilettos. She had built her entire persona on mocking women like me, on boasting that she had secured a legacy billionaire, and now she was staring down the barrel of public bankruptcy. Brenda saw her perfect wealthy family legacy dissolving right in front of the hospital staff. The illusion of the Ellis family superiority was burning to the ground, and she desperately needed a victory. She needed to reclaim the high ground and shift the focus away from Greg's humiliating failure. Brenda marched right past Greg and Tasha, planting herself firmly in front of the bassinet. She placed a protective hand over the sleeping infant, puffing out her chest. We do not need Greg's money, Brenda declared loudly. her voice vibrating with a desperate manic energy. Jamal will figure it out. Because Jamal is a provider. Jamal is a king. You can try to strip away our money, Kendra, but you can never touch our bloodline. Brenda gestured wildly toward the baby, glaring at me with absolute defiance. Look at this beautiful boy. Look at him. This child carries Jamal's strong, undeniable black genetics. He has my son's features. He has the Ellis family strength running through his veins. That is something a cold, barren woman like you could never provide. Jamal produced a perfect heir. His bloodline is secured. You can never take that away from us. Jamal straightened his posture, momentarily inflated by his mother's aggressive praise. He jutted his chin out, trying to look like the proud patriarch Brenda was desperately describing. I looked at Brenda. I looked at Jamal, who was standing tall, puffing his chest out in defense of his supposed legacy. Then I looked over at Jada. Her face was completely drained of blood. She looked like a ghost. Her eyes were darting frantically between Greg, the door, and the floor, completely terrified of what was about to happen. I could not hold it back anymore. I threw my head back and laughed. It was not a polite, restrained chuckle. It was a loud, genuine, echoing laugh that bounced off the vaulted ceilings of the VIP lounge. The sheer, magnificent delusion of it all was simply too much to contain. The entire room went dead silent, watching me laugh as if I had lost my mind. I finally caught my breath, wiping a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. I leveled my gaze, dropping the laughter instantly, and locked eyes with my former mother-in-law. Jamal's genetics. I repeated, my voice dripping with absolute mockery. Is that what he told you, Brenda? Brenda's face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She stepped directly between me and Jamal, puffing out her chest to shield her adult son, as if he were a helpless victim being bullied. How dare you speak about my son that way? Brenda shrieked, her voice bouncing harshly off the marble pillars of the reception area. Jamal is twice the man you could ever handle. He provided this family with a perfect, beautiful heir because he is a strong, virile man. He carries the Ellis name with pride and dominance. You are just a broken, barren woman who could not fulfill her most basic biological duty as a wife. Now you are so consumed by your own empty life that you are trying to project your failures onto a real man. Tasha, desperate to shift the blinding spotlight away from her own husband's silent, sweating humiliation, eagerly joined the attack. She stepped up beside her mother, pointing a sharp acrylic nail in my direction. She is literally making things up because she has absolutely nothing else. Mom, Tasha sneered, adjusting her designer bag on her shoulder to feign a casual confidence she clearly did not feel. Look at her. She has to buy hospital wings just to feel important, because she could not even give Jamal a child. Jamal has always been a king. He upgraded to a younger, more capable, more feminine woman. Kendra is just choking on her own jealousy because Jamal proved his manhood the second he left her. But Jamal was not basking in his mother's and sister's aggressive defense of his masculinity. He was completely unraveling in real time. Heavy, glistening drops of sweat began pouring down his forehead, soaking instantly into the stiff collar of his expensive dress shirt. His broad chest heaved up and down as if the oxygen in the VIP lounge had suddenly been vacuumed out. His eyes darted frantically around the room, wild and terrified. He knew exactly what I held in my hand. He knew the biological truth I was about to drop on his perfect, carefully constructed new life, and the sheer terror of it was breaking his mind. The panic took over completely. Jamal lunged forward, physically grabbing Jada by the upper arm. His grip was tight and frantic, yanking her so hard she stumbled forward in her recovery slippers, clutching the bassinet to her chest with a startled, breathless gasp. "Jamal, you are hurting me!" Jada cried out, trying to pull her arm away to protect the sleeping infant. "We are leaving." Jamal barked, his voice cracking with a high hysterical edge that completely betrayed the strong, virile image his mother had just painted. "I am not doing this. We don't need to listen to this bitter woman. Let's go." He practically dragged his new wife across the polished floor, ignoring her protests and the confused gasps of his own family. He shoved past his mother, abandoned his paralyzed brother-in-law, and made a desperate manic dash straight for the silver elevator doors at the end of the corridor. He was a coward retreating from a battle he knew he had already lost, willing to drag a recovering mother and a newborn baby through the mud just to escape his own lies. I did not chase him. I did not even raise my voice. I simply caught the eye of my executive assistant, Maya, who had been standing silently by the entrance of the adjoining private suite this entire time, holding a thick manila folder against her chest. I gave her a single sharp nod. Maya moved with absolute military precision. Before Jamal could even reach out to press the illuminated call button, she stepped smoothly into his path. She planted herself squarely in front of the polished silver doors, crossing her arms over her sleek black blazer. She did not say a word, but her stance was an immovable brick wall of corporate authority. "Move!" Jamal yelled, his face turning a deep, violently flushed shade of purple. He waved his free hand frantically at Maya, spittle flying from his lips in his desperation. "Get out of my way right now, or I will call the police and have you arrested for holding us hostage." Maya did not even blink. She just stared at him with an expression of mild professional disgust. "Maya is not moving, Jamal," I said, projecting my voice so it carried clearly down the hall, pinning him to the spot. "And you are certainly not calling the police. Because if the police show up, I am going to have them arrest you for the $500,000 you embezzled from our joint accounts before our divorce was finalized. The exact same $500,000 my forensic accountant just handed over to the district attorney this morning." Jamal froze. His hand dropped limply from the air. The aggressive, frantic energy drained out of his body in an instant, leaving him hollow and trembling. Jada used the moment of his paralysis to rip her arm violently out of his grasp. She took a wide, unsteady step away from him, her eyes darting between me, Maya, and the man she thought she knew. The protective illusion Jamal had built around her was shattering piece by piece. I walked slowly down the corridor, the rhythmic click of my heels ringing out like a judge's gavel, finalizing a sentence. I stopped just a few feet away from the trapped group, my gaze sweeping over Brenda's confusion, Tasha's outrage, Greg's silent despair, and Jamal's absolute ruin. I looked at the entire Ellis family perfectly cornered in the very hospital wing they thought they could use to humiliate me. "Nobody is leaving," I demanded, my tone absolute, carrying a chilling calm that left no room for negotiation. "Step away from those doors, Jamal. We are not finished here. In fact, we are just getting to the absolute best part of this family reunion." I turned my gaze away from the pathetic sight of Jamal cowering before my executive assistant and locked eyes entirely on Brenda. The older woman was breathing heavily, her chest puffing up with the arrogant pride of a matriarch who believed her bloodline was invincible. She had spent the last 3 years turning every family dinner, every holiday gathering, and every country club event into a public tribunal regarding my uterus. She delighted in calling me barren. She told anyone who would listen that I was a defective woman who was failing her precious virile son. Jamal let out a strangled, desperate noise. He pushed himself off the reception desk, his legs trembling so violently his knees knocked together. "Kendra, stop," Jamal pleaded, his voice breaking into a humiliating whine. "Do not do this here. I am begging you. I will give you whatever you want. I will sign the new house over to you. I will give you the cars. Just let us leave right now." I did not even bother looking at him. "You already took everything you wanted from me, Jamal," I stated coldly. "Now it is my turn to give something back to your family. I want to give them the absolute truth." I took a slow, deliberate step toward Brenda. "I want you to cast your mind back to exactly 2 years ago, Brenda. November 14th. Do you remember where Jamal and I were that day? You thought we were at a luxury couples retreat trying to save our marriage. We were actually sitting in the sterile, highly secured office of Dr. Sterling, the most expensive and discreet fertility specialist on the East Coast. We were there to get the results of our final exhaustive round of genetic and reproductive testing." Tasha scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes behind her diamond-encrusted sunglasses. "Nobody cares about your tragic medical history, Kendra. We already know you are broken. You do not need to trauma dump on us just because my brother finally got a real woman pregnant." I smiled, a sharp, predatory curving of my lips. Jamal was sweating so heavily now that his expensive dress shirt was entirely soaked through, clinging to his skin like a wet paper bag. He fell back against the marble counter, his legs quite literally giving out as he slid down to the floor in a heap of defeated designer fabric. "Let me teach you a medical term, Brenda," I said, my voice ringing with terrifying clarity. "Azoospermia. It is a very specific, very definitive diagnosis. It means a complete and total absence of sperm. It means absolute irreversible sterility." The VIP lounge went so quiet you could hear the soft rhythmic hum of the air conditioning vents. Brenda blinked, her brow furrowing as her brain struggled to process the syllables I had just spoken. "You see, Brenda, there was never anything wrong with my body," I explained, relishing every single second of her mounting horror. "I was perfectly healthy. Your son is the one who is completely hollow. He was diagnosed as absolutely irrevocably sterile. And sitting in that clinic, your strong, dominant king of a son broke down and sobbed like a child. He fell to his knees and begged me to protect his fragile ego. He told me that if you ever found out his precious bloodline was dead, you would look at him with the exact same disgust you always reserved for me. He begged me to keep his devastating secret, to let the world continue believing that I was the broken one. And like a fool who took her marriage vows seriously, I agreed. I took another step closer, my presence dominating the space. I carried the shame of his biological failure. I let you hurl your vicious insults at me. I let Tasha mock me. I protected his pride at the cost of my own sanity. And how did he repay that absolute loyalty? He filed for divorce, stole my life savings to fund his mistress, and publicly declared to our entire social circle that he had to leave me because I denied him his fundamental right to be a father. Brenda shook her head wildly, her carefully styled hair flying around her face. "No!" Brenda shouted, her voice trembling with violent denial. "You are a liar! You are a vindictive, jealous liar making up disgusting, pathetic stories to ruin my son. Look at that baby. Jada is holding Jamal's son right now. He is an Ellis." I let out a sharp, dark laugh. I extended my right hand without looking away from Brenda's panicked face. Maya stepped forward, instantly moving with perfect efficiency. She placed a sleek silver tablet directly into my palm. I tapped the screen once, bringing up a highly secured encrypted medical portal. "I am a woman of science, Brenda. I do not deal in petty gossip or emotional manipulation." I stated, my tone dropping to a low, lethal register. "I deal in hard, unassailable data." I shoved the illuminated screen directly into Brenda's face. She instinctively recoiled, but I stepped into her space, forcing her to look at the stark black and white text. "Read it," I commanded. "Read the official diagnostic report from the Massachusetts Institute of Reproductive Medicine. Look at the digital signature of the chief fertility specialist at the bottom of the page. It clearly states that Jamal Ellis has zero chance of ever fathering a biological child. That condition does not miraculously cure itself, Brenda." Brenda stared at the glowing screen. Her eyes darted back and forth across the medical jargon. She recognized the hospital letterhead. She saw Jamal's full legal name and date of birth at the top of the file. She saw the heavy bolded conclusion at the bottom of the page. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble. The massive designer purse slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. I slowly turned my head to look at Jada. She had backed herself entirely into the corner of the room, looking as though she might pass out. Her breathing was so rapid I could see her chest heaving against her silk recovery robe. Jada was clutching the baby so tightly she looked like a cornered animal waiting for the final strike. So I continued, my voice echoing through the deafening silence of the room. "If Jamal is biologically incapable of producing a child, and Jada just gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom you have been parading around as the ultimate Ellis heir, we are left with a rather fascinating mathematical problem." The silence that followed my words was so absolute, so profound. It felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked directly out of the VIP lounge. Brenda stood frozen. Her eyes remained locked on the glowing screen of the tablet in Maya's hands. The medical terms, the official hospital seal, the undeniable digital signature of the chief specialist, it all crashed into her pristine, carefully curated reality, like a wrecking ball. The physical impact of the realization visibly rippled through her body. Her shoulders dropped. Her perfectly styled posture collapsed. The illusion of the mighty Ellis bloodline, the legacy she had weaponized against me for years, disintegrated into ash right in front of her. Slowly, Brenda turned her head. She looked away from the undeniable medical proof and stared down at her son. Jamal was not standing tall. He was not projecting the fierce, dominant masculine energy his mother had just spent 10 minutes screaming about. He was still crumpled on the marble floor, his knees pulled to his chest, weeping. He was sobbing loudly, his face buried in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with the pathetic, undeniable shame of a man whose deepest, most guarded secret had just been broadcast to the world. He did not look up to defend himself. He did not deny the diagnosis. His tears were the ultimate confession. Brenda stared at her broken son, but I did not see an ounce of maternal sympathy in her eyes. I saw absolute unfiltered fury. Her golden child had humiliated her. He had allowed her to parade around a hospital boasting about his virility, knowing full well he was biologically incapable of producing an heir. The embarrassment of looking like a fool in front of me was more than her massive ego could handle. Her gaze slowly shifted away from Jamal, moving across the room until it locked onto Jada. Jada pressed her back against the far wall, clutching the swaddled newborn so tightly to her chest that the baby let out a soft, muffled whimper. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. The smug, arrogant mistress, who had eagerly mocked my career and my supposed infertility, was completely gone. In her place stood a terrified woman who realized the massive, fraudulent house of cards she had built was currently burning to the ground. Brenda took a slow, menacing step toward her new daughter-in-law. "If my son is sterile," Brenda whispered, her voice vibrating with a dark, venomous rage that completely erased her previous grandmotherly warmth. "If my son is physically incapable of giving you a child, then what exactly are you holding in your arms right now?" Jada shook her head frantically, stepping sideways along the wall. "Brenda, please." Jada stammered, her voice cracking with pure panic. "It is a mistake. The test is wrong. You know Jamal is the father. Look at him. Look at his face. Do not play games with me." Brenda snapped, taking another aggressive step forward, her hands curling into tight fists at her sides. "Do not insult my intelligence. I just read the medical report. I just saw the undeniable proof. My son is completely barren. He cannot have children. So I am going to ask you one more time, and you had better tell me the truth before I rip that baby out of your arms and order a DNA test myself. Whose baby is this?" Jada opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Jamal, silently begging the man she had married to stand up and protect her. But Jamal just kept his face buried in his hands, continuing to sob on the floor, completely paralyzed by his own public emasculation. He had no power left to offer her. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Tasha, who had been standing completely silent since discovering her husband's total financial ruin, suddenly snapped her head up. Her eyes darted from Jada to the baby, and then slowly toward Greg. I watched the exact moment the realization hit Tasha. I watched her perfectly contoured face drain of all color. I felt a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the reception desk, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular implosion of the people who had tried to destroy me. "You know, Brenda," I interjected, my voice light, conversational, and entirely lethal. "You really should not be so harsh on Jada. She is just a woman who appreciates the finer things in life. She appreciates luxury apartments. She appreciates fully funded shopping sprees. And she clearly appreciates a man who can actually provide those things without having to steal from his wife to do it." Brenda whipped her head around to glare at me. "What are you talking about, Kendra?" she demanded, her voice shrill with confusion and rage. "I am talking about basic forensic accounting, Brenda," I explained smoothly, letting my eyes slide away from her and drift deliberately across the room. When my team seized Jamal's offshore accounts, we had to trace every single penny he spent over the last 2 years. We had to track exactly how he was funding his secret second life. But during that audit, my accountant found something incredibly fascinating. Jamal was not the one paying for Jada's luxury high-rise apartment downtown. Jamal was not the one covering her massive credit card bills. His stolen funds were simply not enough to maintain the lavish lifestyle she demanded. I let the silence hang for a fraction of a second, letting the anticipation twist the knife deeper into their collective chests. "So, if my son is sterile," Brenda yelled, completely ignoring my explanation, pointing a shaking finger directly at Jada, "whose baby is this?" My smile widened into a sharp, predatory grin. I did not look at Jada. I did not look at Brenda. I looked directly at the pale, sweating, utterly ruined man standing frozen in the center of the room. "Why do you not ask the man who has been paying Jada's rent for the last 9 months?" I suggested, my voice ringing out with terrifying clarity. Every single head in the room turned. Brenda, Tasha, and Jamal all snapped their attention exactly where my gaze was locked. They stared at Greg. Greg, who was already suffocating under the weight of his massive financial collapse. Greg, who had sold me his final remaining asset this morning just to avoid federal prison. Greg, who was currently staring at Jada and the newborn baby with a look of absolute, undeniable guilt. Tasha let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She ripped her diamond sunglasses off her face, staring at her husband as if he had just transformed into a monster. "Greg," Tasha whispered, her voice cracking, echoing through the dead-silent maternity ward. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you are not the father of my brother's baby." Greg looked at his wife. Then he looked at the marble floor. He did not say a single word. He just stood there, completely broken, while the entire Ellis family realized that the ultimate heir they had just been bragging about was the product of the ultimate betrayal. The silence hung in the VIP lounge for exactly one heartbeat before the entire room exploded into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Tasha shattered the quiet with a sound that tore from her throat like a wild animal. She lunges forward, her expensive stilettos clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure desperation, her perfectly contoured features stretching into something ugly and primal. She pointed her finger directly at my face, her manicured nail trembling violently. "You are a liar!" Tasha shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are a bitter, jealous liar. You could not keep your own husband, so now you are trying to destroy my marriage. You are a home wrecker, Kendra. You forged those bank records. You forged that medical report. Greg would never look at a cheap, low-class girl like Jada. He is a legacy builder. He is my husband." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood there, my hands resting lightly on the cool marble counter, and watched Tasha unravel. She was screaming so hard that a thick vein bulged against the side of her neck. Her designer sunglasses lay discarded on the floor, crunched beneath her own heel, as she threw a completely unhinged temper tantrum. She was desperately trying to rewrite reality by yelling at it, praying that if she screamed loud enough, the nightmare would disappear. While Tasha was busy projecting her entirely misplaced rage onto me, Jada decided she had endured enough. She saw the Ellis family turning on themselves like a pack of starving wolves, and her survival instinct finally kicked in. Jada hitched the swaddled newborn higher on her chest, hiking up the hem of her silk recovery robe, and made a mad dash for the heavy red emergency exit doors at the far end of the lounge. She moved surprisingly fast for a woman who had just given birth, her eyes wide with the frantic terror of a cornered thief trying to escape with her stolen goods. I did not shout. I did not move to chase her. I simply shifted my gaze to the dark alcove just past the reception desk. I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Before Jada could even press her hand against the crash bar of the emergency exit, two massive hospital security guards stepped out of the shadows. They moved with silent, synchronized precision, planting themselves directly in front of the red doors. They crossed their arms over their broad chests, forming an impenetrable human barricade. Jada slammed to a halt, her bare feet skidding slightly on the polished floor. She gasped, clutching the baby tight against her collarbone. "Move!" Jada demanded, her voice shaking with panic. "Let me out! You cannot keep me here!" "This is a hospital." The guards did not even blink. They stared straight ahead, completely ignoring her demands. They worked for the hospital, and I currently owned this entire wing. Nobody was leaving until I decided the show was over. Jada took a stumbling step backward, her breath hitching in her throat as she realized she was entirely trapped in the VIP lounge with the family she had just humiliated. Across the room, Tasha finally realized that screaming at me was not changing the facts. She turned her furious, manic gaze away from me and locked onto her husband. Greg was not defending himself. He was not rushing forward to comfort his wife or deny the accusations. He was currently having a massive, debilitating panic attack. He backed away from Tasha, his highly polished dress shoes slipping awkwardly against the floor. His face had drained to an alarming, sickly shade of gray. He was hyperventilating, taking short, ragged gasps of air that sounded like he was drowning on dry land. "Look at me, Greg!" Tasha screamed, marching toward him with her hands balled into tight fists. "Tell me it is a lie. Tell me you did not pay for that trashy girl's apartment. Tell me you did not father a bastard child with my brother's new wife." Greg pressed his back flat against the wall, trapped between a towering decorative fern and his enraged wife. He raised his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender, his palms shaking uncontrollably. He opened his mouth to speak, but the only sound that came out was a high, wheezing gasp. The titan of downtown real estate, the man who ruthlessly evicted single mothers and crushed small businesses without a second thought, was currently whimpering like a beaten dog. He could not look Tasha in the eye. His gaze kept darting to Jada, to the baby, and then to the floor, confirming every single accusation with his cowardly silence. And then there was Jamal. The crying had stopped. The pathetic whimpering sobs that had just racked his body had abruptly ceased. Jamal slowly pushed himself up from the floor. He leaned heavily against a marble pillar to steady his trembling legs. His face was a mask of absolute hollow shock. His eyes, completely devoid of their usual arrogant spark, were fixed dead ahead. He was not looking at Jada. He was not looking at the baby he had claimed as his legacy. Jamal was staring exclusively at Greg. The realization was visibly crashing through Jamal's brain, connecting every missing dot, every unexplained absence, every overly generous gesture. Greg was not just his sister's husband. Greg was his best friend. They had pledged the same fraternity. They had vacationed together. They had drank expensive scotch together while Jamal bragged about his beautiful new pregnant wife. Greg had stood right beside him, smiling, nodding, and playing the role of the supportive brother-in-law, all while secretly funding the apartment where he was sleeping with Jamal's wife. Greg had let Jamal humiliate himself by claiming a child that physically could not belong to him. Greg had let Jamal parade around the city boasting about his virility, knowing the entire time that he was the one who had actually impregnated Jada. Jamal's mouth hung slightly open. His chest rose and fell in slow, heavy motions. He stared at the hyperventilating, sweating man in the corner, watching the absolute destruction of his entire brotherhood. The king of the Ellis family had not just been dethroned. He had been completely emasculated by his own best friend. The tension in the VIP lounge was no longer just thick. It was highly combustible, an open powder keg waiting for a single spark. The powder keg did not just spark, it detonated the moment the heavy double doors of the VIP lounge swung open with a smooth, heavy click. The sound was soft, but it carried an authority that instantly silenced Tasha's hysterical shrieking. Every frantic, tear-stained face in the room snapped toward the entrance. A man walked through the threshold. His presence a stark contrast to the sweaty, hyperventilating mess of the Ellis family. He wore a razor-sharp, charcoal-tailored suit that looked like it cost more than Greg's entire remaining liquid assets. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his expression was a mask of absolute clinical detachment. It was Dr. Sterling, the chief of genetics at the hospital. He did not spare a single glance for Jamal, who was still slumped against the pillar, or Tasha, who was practically foaming at the mouth. He bypassed the screaming family entirely, his polished shoes gliding silently across the marble floor until he stopped directly in front of me. He extended his hand, presenting a thick, heavily sealed white envelope. "The expedited results you requested. Director Dr. Sterling said, his voice smooth and professional. The lab ran the panels twice to ensure absolute zero margin accuracy. Thank you, doctor, I replied, taking the heavy envelope. Your discretion and speed are greatly appreciated. Dr. Sterling gave a crisp nod, turned on his heel, and walked out of the lounge just as calmly as he had entered, the heavy doors clicking shut behind him. I held the envelope up. The thick paper felt substantial in my hands. The room watched me, completely paralyzed. Even Greg had stopped gasping for air, his eyes locked onto the white rectangle, as if it were a loaded gun pointed directly at his chest. One of the many perks of being a primary investor and a sitting board director of this hospital, I began running my manicured thumb along the seal, is that doors open for you? Red tape disappears. When I presented my legal team with the financial discrepancies linking Greg's corporate accounts to Jada's luxury apartment, we requested an emergency court-ordered DNA test to trace the true origin of the embezzlement fallout. We needed to know exactly what Greg was paying for. I ripped the seal open. The sound of tearing paper echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Jada let out a strangled sob, pressing her back so hard against the wall, it looked like she was trying to merge with the drywall. The security guards standing by the emergency exit shifted their weight, their imposing frames daring her to make another run for it. I pulled the thick stack of official medical documents from the envelope. I did not even need to read them to know what they said. My forensic accountants and private investigators had already mapped out the entire ugly, predictable timeline, but I wanted the Ellis family to hear every single dirty detail. I looked directly at Jada. You see, Jada, I actually respect a good hustle. I really do. But yours was just incredibly sloppy. I tapped the thick stack of papers against the palm of my hand. Let us walk through the timeline, shall we? We all know Jamal loves to play the rich, dominant provider. But the second our divorce was finalized and I froze his access to my assets, you realized your new king was actually completely broke. Jamal had no real wealth of his own. He was just a shiny, hollow shell surviving on his mother's praise and my bank accounts. I turned my gaze to Greg, who was sweating profusely, a dark, damp stain spreading across the underarms of his suit. But Greg here, I continued, my voice dripping with venomous amusement. Greg is a legacy builder. Greg actually controls the purse strings. And Greg loves a shiny new toy. The timeline is undeniable. You and Greg started sleeping together exactly 3 weeks after my divorce from Jamal was finalized. You saw a sinking ship, and you immediately jumped into bed with the man who held the life rafts. Tasha let out a guttural gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She stared at Greg, her perfectly styled world collapsing into a pile of cheap, filthy rubble. It was the perfect arrangement, I said, pacing slowly in front of the frozen group. Greg got to feel like a powerful man playing outside his marriage, and Jada got her rent paid in a luxury downtown high-rise. But then a massive complication arose. You got pregnant, Jada. I stopped pacing and locked eyes with the terrified woman clutching the newborn. You got pregnant and you panicked, I stated, my tone dropping to a hard, unforgiving register. You knew Greg would never leave Tasha. He needed the Ellis family connections too much to survive his own impending bankruptcy. If you named Greg as the father, you would be a discarded mistress with a bastard child left to fend for yourself. So you looked around for a fall guy. You needed a gullible, desperate idiot with a fragile ego and a desperate need to prove his manhood. I slowly turned my head, my eyes sliding over to Jamal. He was staring at me, his face completely slack, his mouth hanging open. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground and was only now smelling the smoke. Enter Jamal, I said, projecting my voice so it hit every corner of the VIP lounge. A man so desperately insecure, so terrified of his mother discovering his irreversible sterility, that he practically begged you to let him claim the child. You pinned Greg's baby on Jamal, securing a wedding ring and a place in the Ellis family, all while quietly extorting monthly hush money from Greg on the side to keep his secret safe. You built your entire comfortable life on the absolute pathetic stupidity of these two men. Brenda let out a sound that defied description. It was a wheezing, broken noise like a balloon slowly deflating. The fierce, untouchable matriarch, who had spent years berating my womb, was currently staring at a baby that belonged to her daughter's cheating husband and her son's deceptive gold-digging wife. Her pure, superior bloodline was a tangled, incestuous mess of lies and extortion. I held up the official DNA report, flipping to the final page, where the genetic markers were perfectly matched and boldly highlighted. Probability of paternity, I read aloud, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. 99.9%. Gregory Vance is the biological father of this child. The paperwork slipped from my fingers, fluttering softly through the air before landing precisely at Greg's trembling feet. "There is your legacy, Greg," I said, stepping back from the wreckage. "I hope it was worth the price of admission." The second the paper hit the floor, a sound ripped through the VIP lounge that did not even sound human. It was a guttural banshee shriek of pure, unadulterated agony. Tasha launched herself across the room. She did not walk. She did not run. She flew at Greg with her manicured hands hooked like claws. She collided with his chest so hard that the heavy thud of the impact echoed off the walls. She grabbed the lapels of his custom Italian suit and ripped. The fabric tore with a loud, satisfying shred. Buttons pinged off the marble floor like tiny bullets. Tasha beat her fists against his chest, his shoulders, his face screaming incoherently. Greg raised his arms to protect his face, cowering against the wall, slipping on the polished stone as his wife dismantled him piece by piece. The perfect, untouchable white knight of the family, the financial savior of their legacy, was nothing but a treacherous fraud. Tasha screamed until her voice went hoarse, demanding to know how long, how many times, and how he could possibly father a child with her own brother's new wife. Greg had no answers. Every ounce of his corporate bravado had evaporated. He simply took the beating, shrinking into a pathetic, ruined shell of a man. A few feet away, Brenda Ellis finally broke. The undeniable matriarch of the family, the woman who had terrorized me for years about my worth, simply folded under the weight of the truth. Her limited edition designer bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a heavy thud, spilling cosmetics and gold-embossed credit cards everywhere. She clutched at her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her knees gave out and she sank onto a velvet waiting chair, her eyes wide and vacant. The perfect, pristine Ellis legacy she had weaponized against the world was entirely dead. Her son was biologically sterile. Her son-in-law was a predator who had bankrupted himself paying for his mistress. Her daughter-in-law was a manipulative fraud. The aristocratic bloodline she worshipped was an absolute incestuous nightmare. But the true danger was brewing by the reception desk. Amidst the screaming and the chaos, Jamal had finally processed the magnitude of his total public emasculation. He slowly turned his head toward Jada. Jada was still pinned against the emergency exit by my security team, clutching the crying newborn. When she saw the look in Jamal's eyes, the color completely drained from her face. Jamal let out a roar of blind, humiliated rage. The man who had spent months strutting around the city claiming another man's child as a trophy of his own virility completely snapped. He lunged toward Jada, his arm pulling back, his hand curling into a massive fist. He was fully prepared to strike her down right there in the maternity ward. I did not flinch. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sharp crack of my fingers was the only signal my security team needed. Before Jamal could even close the distance, the two massive guards stepped away from the door and intercepted him. The movement was a blur of calculated, organized violence. The lead guard hit Jamal square in the chest, utilizing his forward momentum to sweep his legs completely out from under him. The heavy thud of Jamal hitting the marble floor sent a physical vibration through the soles of my shoes. He thrashed violently under the weight of my security team, grunting and twisting his shoulders, but the guards pressed their knees firmly between his shoulder blades. They flattened him against the cold stone with effortless, terrifying precision. His cheek was smashed against the floor, his mouth opening and closing as he gasped for air, completely neutralized. "Not in my hospital, you do not." My words hung in the air, cold and absolute. The wild, frenzied energy that had just consumed the VIP lounge was instantly suffocated by the sheer, undeniable reality of my control. I owned this room. I owned this moment. and every single person in the Ellis family suddenly realized they were completely trapped inside a cage of their own making. Across the room, the titan of the family was in ruins. Greg lay crumpled near the base of a shattered decorative planter. Tasha had finally stepped back, her chest heaving, leaving her husband a bloody, shredded mess on the floor. Her acrylic nails had dug deep into his face during her attack. 3 distinct jagged scratches ran down his cheek and across his jawline. Bright red blood beaded on the surface of his skin, dripping slowly onto the starched white collar of his custom Italian shirt. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, the expensive fabric hanging in pathetic ribbons. He was not looking at Tasha. He was not looking at the infant he had fathered with his brother-in-law's wife. He was staring blankly at his own hands, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked stutters. From the velvet waiting chair, a ragged, desperate sound broke the silence. Brenda Ellis forced herself to stand. Her face was ashen, her breathing shallow and erratic, but her legendary arrogance simply refused to let her die on the floor like a commoner. She stepped over her spilled designer bag, her expensive heels crunching over her scattered gold credit cards. She completely ignored her golden son, who was currently whimpering under the boots of my security guards. She ignored Jada, who was shaking uncontrollably against the emergency exit. Brenda marched directly toward the bleeding, broken man curled on the marble floor. "Get up, Gregory!" Brenda commanded, her voice shrill, vibrating with a desperate, clinging authority. "Get up off the floor right this instant and act like a man! You are embarrassing this family!" Greg did not move. He slowly reached up, touching his bleeding cheek with trembling fingertips. He stared at the blood on his hands, as if he could not comprehend how it got there. "Did you hear me?" Brenda shrieked, kicking the sole of Greg's expensive leather shoe with her pointed heel. "I said fix this. Call your lawyers. Call your offshore bankers. I do not care what it costs." Brenda spun around, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. Her eyes were wild, completely detached from the reality of the room. She was operating purely on the delusion of her past power, desperately trying to assemble the shattered pieces of her legacy through sheer volume. "Pay her off, Gregory!" Brenda yelled, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceiling. "Throw $10 million at this bitter little girl and make her go away. Buy the hospital board. Have her fired. Silence her. You are a legacy builder. You are the financial pillar of this family. Do not just sit there bleeding like a coward. Buy our way out of this." Greg let out a sound that was half gasp, half wet laugh. It was the most pathetic noise I had ever heard. He tilted his head back against the wall, smearing a streak of blood against the pristine white paint. He did not look at his mother-in-law. He did not look at his furious wife. He simply closed his eyes and let his head loll to the side. I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the polished reception desk. I watched Brenda's chest heave as she waited for a response that was never going to come. She was demanding miracles from a man who no longer had the power to buy a cup of coffee. "He cannot buy you out of this." "Brenda," I said, my voice smooth, conversational, and completely lethal. Brenda snapped her head toward me, her eyes flashing with pure hatred. "You shut your mouth, Kendra. You are nothing but a gold-digging little nobody who got lucky. My son-in-law could buy and sell you 10 times over." I smiled. It was a slow, predatory expression that made Brenda take an involuntary step backward. "Your son-in-law is completely bankrupt," I corrected, articulating every single syllable with crystal clarity. "He cannot throw $10 million at me, Brenda, because he does not have $10 million. He does not even have $10. The money he used to fund Jada's luxury apartment, the money he used to secretly prop up Jamal's failing investments, was the exact money my forensic team traced. He embezzled it. And the second we found the paper trail, my lawyers seized every single one of his accounts." Brenda shook her head frantically. No, that is a lie. Gregory is a titan. He owns half the downtown commercial real estate." "He owned half the downtown commercial real estate," I corrected smoothly. Past tense. "He sold his final remaining asset to me this morning just to avoid federal indictment. I own his buildings. I own his company. I own the ground you are standing on right now." I pushed myself off of the reception desk and took 3 slow, measured steps toward the center of the room. The clicking of my heels sounded like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of the Ellis dynasty. You built your entire identity on the illusion of superiority, Brenda. I continued, locking my eyes entirely on hers. You tortured me for years because you thought my blood was not good enough for your family. You paraded Jamal around like a king, knowing full well he was a financial parasite. You worshipped Greg because he paid your country club dues. And you protected Jada because she gave you the one thing you wanted most, an heir. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the absolute devastation of the room. Jamal pinned to the floor, Jada cowering in the corner, Greg bleeding against the wall, Tasha weeping uncontrollably. Look at your legacy now, I whispered, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Your son is barren. Your son-in-law is a broke, cheating felon. And your precious grandson is the product of the ultimate betrayal. There is no money left to buy your silence. There is no power left to hide behind. You are nothing. Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The fire in her eyes finally extinguished, replaced by the blank, hollow stare of a woman who realized she had been thoroughly, undeniably destroyed. She looked at Greg, pleading silently for him to stand up and prove me wrong. But Greg just kept his eyes closed, bleeding quietly onto his ruined suit, entirely surrendering to his own destruction. The click of the twin brass latches on my briefcase echoed through the dead silent VIP lounge like the racking of a shotgun. Every single head turned toward me. The wild, frenzied energy that had just consumed the room was instantly suffocated by the cold, mechanical sound. Tasha had fled. Jada was cowering under the watchful eyes of my security team. Jamal was pinned face down on the cold marble floor, his cheek smashed against the stone. Greg was bleeding in the corner, his custom suit hanging in shredded ribbons after his wife's attack. And Brenda sat frozen in her velvet chair, staring at me with a hollow, terrified rasp in her breathing. What else could you possibly have? Brenda whispered. Her voice was stripped of all its former venom, leaving only the fragile, shaking tone of a woman who had just watched her dynasty evaporate. You have already destroyed us. I have not even started on the criminal charges, Brenda, I replied smoothly. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a massive, heavily bound financial dossier. I let it drop onto the reception counter. The thick stack of paper hit the marble with a heavy, definitive thud that made Greg flinch from the floor. You thought the DNA test was the killing blow, I said, resting my hands lightly on the dossier. That was just a dirty little family secret. This is federal. Greg let out a strangled groan. He tried to scramble backward, pressing himself tighter into the corner, leaving a smeared trail of blood from his scratched cheek against the pristine white wall. He knew exactly what a forensic accounting report looked like. Greg, I said, stepping away from the counter and walking slowly toward him. Did you really think you could hide an 8-figure deficit by washing it through 3 different dummy shell companies in the Cayman Islands? Did you truly believe your creative accounting was invisible to the people who actually own the board? Greg squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically back and forth. Please, he gasped, his voice cracking with pure terror. Kendra, please, I gave you the buildings. I signed the deeds over to you this morning. You said you would leave my firm alone. I said I would take your buildings in exchange for not pressing civil charges regarding your theft of my personal marital assets. I corrected my tone, completely devoid of mercy. I never said a single word about ignoring the massive systemic corporate fraud you committed against your own investors. Brenda's head snapped back and forth between me and her son-in-law. Corporate fraud? What are you talking about? Gregory runs a legitimate real estate empire. Gregory runs a Ponzi scheme, Brenda Weiss stated, clearly projecting my voice so every person in the room heard the absolute truth. And I know this because my healthcare technology company did not just grow over the last few years. We expanded. We diversified our portfolio. 2 months ago, my board approved the acquisition of a massive corporate holding group named Vanguard Financial. Greg let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper at the name. He pulled his knees to his chest, burying his bloody face in his arms as if trying to hide from reality. I see Greg recognizes the name, I said, offering a cold, razor-sharp smile. For those of you not in the corporate loop, Vanguard Financial is the parent company of the elite accounting firm that audits Greg's real estate group. When I sat down at my very first board meeting as the new majority shareholder, I ordered a comprehensive, highly aggressive forensic audit of all our Tier 1 clients, starting immediately with Greg. I walked back to the counter, flipped the dossier open, and tore out a thick stack of bank statements highlighted in bright, unforgiving yellow. I tossed them into the air. The papers fluttered down like snow, scattering over Greg's expensive, ruined shoes and pooling around Brenda's feet. The audit took exactly 3 days to uncover the rot. I explained, my voice carrying the steady, methodical rhythm of an executioner reading a sentence. Greg has been siphoning millions of dollars out of his firm's escrow accounts. He has been stealing tenant deposits, draining investor capital, and manipulating the quarterly profit margins to hide the missing cash. But the truly fascinating part was tracking exactly where all those stolen millions went. I turned my gaze away from Greg and locked it onto Jada. She stopped crying instantly. She held her breath, pressing herself flatter against the wall, clutching the baby tight against her chest. Jada was not just getting her rent paid, I said, ensuring every syllable landed with maximum impact. Jada is greedy. When she realized she was pregnant with Greg's baby, she did not just secure Jamal as a fake husband. She used the DNA to hold Greg hostage. She demanded hush money, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to keep her mouth shut and pretend the child belonged to a sterile man. She was bleeding Greg dry, forcing him to embezzle more and more investor funds just to keep her draped in designer clothes and chauffeured in luxury cars. Brenda looked like she was going to be physically ill. She stared at Jada with a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. The perfect, subservient daughter-in-law she had paraded around was actually a master extortionist who had bankrupted the family's greatest asset. But wait, Brenda, I said, stepping closer to the velvet chair where she sat paralyzed. It gets so much better. Because Jada was not the only parasite draining Greg's stolen funds. I pivoted on my heel, pointing directly at Jamal. My security guard still had him pinned firmly to the floor, but he turned his head to look at me. His jaw was clenched, his eyes wide with rising, undeniable panic. "Where do you think Jamal got the money for his sports cars, Brenda?" I asked, my voice ringing with lethal clarity. "Where do you think he got the cash to pay his exorbitant country club dues, his tailored suits, and those ridiculous diamond watches he loves to flash around? You knew he had no real job. You knew he had no actual income. You just blindly assumed he was a brilliant businessman making quiet investments." Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his face hard into the marble to avoid looking at his mother. Greg was funding Jamal, I revealed, dropping the ultimate bomb right into the center of the room. Greg was funneling stolen investor capital directly into Jamal's bank accounts under the guise of fake consulting fees. Greg paid for Jamal's entire lavish lifestyle just to keep Jamal distracted, arrogant, and completely oblivious to the fact that Greg was sleeping with his wife right under his nose. Brenda let out a ragged, choking gasp. She looked down at her golden boy, the son she had elevated above all others, the man she had used to constantly belittle my worth. "Your son is not a king, Brenda," I whispered, leaning in close so she could see the absolute triumph burning in my eyes. "He is a sterile, cuckolded fraud. He is a financial parasite who only survived by eating the stolen table scraps of his sister's husband. Your entire family is a carefully dressed illusion built on stolen money and bastard children. Please," Greg begged from the floor, his voice wet with tears and blood. "Kendra, please. I have nothing left. I gave you the buildings. Do not give the audit to the authorities. They will lock me away for 20 years. I stood up straight, looking down at the ruined titan of the Ellis family. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone and checking the time. "I am afraid you are a little late for negotiations, Greg," I said smoothly, slipping the phone back into my pocket. I handed the completely unredacted forensic audit to the FBI field office yesterday morning. In fact, based on the timeline my legal team gave me, federal agents are kicking down the glass doors of your corporate headquarters right this very second. The color completely drained from Greg's face, leaving him looking like a freshly embalmed corpse. His jaw trembled and he scrambled backward against the wall, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping uselessly against the polished marble floor. He looked frantically toward the emergency exit, then toward the main double doors, like a trapped rat calculating a completely impossible escape route. "You think you can run, Greg?" I asked, my voice echoing with hollow amusement. "You really think my forensic team uncovered a multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement scheme, and I just casually strolled in here without making a few phone calls first?" I shook my head slowly, letting the absolute finality of his situation sink into his bones. "You do not need to worry about your corporate office, Greg. 2 agents from the White-Collar Crime Division are currently waiting for you in the main lobby downstairs. They have a warrant, handcuffs, and a very strong desire to ask you about those Cayman Island accounts." Greg let out a sound that I could only describe as a dying wheeze. He slumped forward, burying his bleeding face into his hands, rocking back and forth as the reality of a federal prison sentence crashed over him. Tasha, who had been standing a few feet away, staring at her husband in absolute disgust, suddenly straightened her spine. Her tear-streaked face morphed into a mask of pure, self-preserving fury. "I am divorcing him," Tasha declared, her voice ringing out loudly, desperately trying to distance herself from the wreckage. "I am taking the house in the Hamptons. I am taking the cars. I am freezing the joint accounts right now, and I am taking every single penny he has left. He is not dragging me down with him." I turned my gaze to Tasha. I actually let out a short, genuine laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound that made her flinch. "You are taking absolutely nothing, Tasha," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "Do you honestly not understand how federal asset forfeiture works? You do not get to keep the Hamptons house. You do not get to keep the imported cars. Every single joint account you share with that felon is currently frozen by the federal government. The money you spent on your designer bags, your spa weekends, and your country club memberships was stolen from innocent investors. The feds do not care that you were a clueless, spoiled housewife. They seized it all." Tasha's mouth dropped open. She looked down at her diamond rings, then back up at me, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "You are officially broke, Tasha," I stated, dropping the final hammer on her pampered existence. "You are going to walk out of this hospital with nothing but the torn clothes on your back. You are going to need a public defender, and I highly suggest you start looking for a minimum wage job because your days of playing the wealthy socialite are permanently over." Tasha let out a high, thin wail. Her legs gave out and she collapsed onto a waiting chair, burying her face in her lap as she sobbed hysterically. I did not even pause. I simply turned my head, locking my eyes onto Jamal. My ex-husband was still pinned to the floor by my security team. His face was pressed against the cold stone, but his eyes were wide, darting frantically around the room as he watched his entire family get systematically dismantled. "And then there is you, Jamal," I whispered, stepping closer to where he lay. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room during our divorce. You cried poverty. You claimed your startup ventures had failed. You submitted sworn financial affidavits to the judge, claiming you had zero liquid assets, forcing me to walk away with a fraction of what I was owed just to be completely rid of you." Jamal swallowed hard, his throat bobbing against the marble. "Kendra, listen," he choked out, his voice muffled. "I do not want to listen to you, Jamal," I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. "I want to tell you about the offshore accounts my investigators found. The ones where you hid over $4 million during our divorce proceedings. The exact same accounts Greg was funneling his embezzled money into. You committed perjury, Jamal. You lied to a federal judge to hide assets during a divorce settlement." Jamal closed his eyes, a tear slipping out and tracking through the dust on the floor. "I submitted the proof to my legal team yesterday." I continued, ensuring every word was a physical blow. "We filed an emergency motion to reopen our divorce case. The judge was absolutely furious when she saw the financial records. I am not just suing you for the money you hid from me, Jamal. I am suing you for fraud, for damages, and for every single stolen penny Greg deposited into your accounts. By the time my lawyers are finished with you, you will be paying me back for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Tasha weeping and Greg hyperventilating. I had done it. I had meticulously tracked every lie, every theft, and every betrayal, and I had burned their empire to the ground. Then a sudden frantic movement caught my eye. Brenda Ellis, the untouchable aristocratic matriarch who had spent years making me feel completely worthless, slid off her velvet chair. She did not stand. She fell forward. Her knees hit the hard marble floor with a heavy thud. She crawled toward me. The woman who wore Chanel suits and sipped vintage champagne was dragging herself across the floor like a desperate, terrified animal. Her perfect hair was a mess. Her expensive makeup was smeared across her face. "Kendra, please." Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking with pure, unrestrained desperation. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers desperately grabbing the hem of my tailored skirt. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no regret, just the cold, clinical satisfaction of total victory. "Please, Kendra, you cannot do this." Brenda wept, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. "We are your family. You were my daughter-in-law. You used to sit at my dinner table. You used to go to our church every single Sunday. Have some Christian grace, Kendra. I am begging you. Have some mercy on us." I stared down at the broken woman clutching my clothes. I slowly reached down, grabbing her chin with my fingers. I lifted her face, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "Grace is for the repentant, Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously soft and completely hollow of any forgiveness. "I am just the bill collector." I released Brenda's chin, letting her face drop back down. I stepped away just as the heavy silver doors of the VIP elevator slid open with a soft melodic chime. 4 men in dark windbreakers stepped onto the marble floor. Their badges caught the fluorescent light of the hospital corridor. They did not pause at the reception desk. They did not ask for directions. My security team simply stepped aside and let the federal agents walk right into the center of the wreckage. Gregory Vance, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of the United States government. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." Greg did not even try to stand. He stayed slumped against the wall, a pathetic, bleeding mess of torn Italian wool and shattered pride. 2 agents grabbed him by the arms, hauling him to his feet like a rag doll. The metallic zip and click of the handcuffs echoing off the walls sounded like a bank vault locking shut. Greg burst into tears. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. He wailed, his knees buckling so heavily that the agents had to drag him forward. Snot and blood smeared across his face as he desperately looked over his shoulder. "Tasha," he choked out, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "Tasha, call the firm. Call my lawyers. Please." Tasha pressed her back against the glass partition, pulling her ruined designer coat tightly around herself. She looked at her husband as if he were a rotting carcass on the side of the road. She did not say a word. She simply turned her head away, letting the agents drag the financial savior of the Ellis family out of the maternity wing in front of everyone. Jamal watched the federal agents disappear into the elevator with his brother-in-law. The sheer terror in his eyes was palpable. He realized the exact same forensic audit that just sent Greg to federal prison had already exposed his offshore accounts. He was next. Jamal scrambled to his feet, ignoring the security guards, who were now focused on clearing the room. He patted his pockets, frantically pulling out his cell phone with shaking hands. "Jamal, wait." The voice was small, desperate, and trembling. Jada stood near the emergency exit, clutching the newborn tightly to her chest. Her face was stained with mascara, her expensive silk robe wrinkled and damp with sweat. She looked at the man she had manipulated, the man she had used as a convenient shield for her infidelity. "Jamal, please," Jada begged, taking a step toward him. "Where are we supposed to go? Greg's accounts are frozen. I do not have access to the apartment anymore. You have to take us with you." Jamal stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, looking at the woman he had paraded around town for the last 9 months. He looked at the baby wrapped in a luxury cashmere blanket, the child he had claimed as proof of his own manhood. the child that belonged to the man currently being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. Jamal's upper lip curled into a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. "Take you with me." Jamal spat, his voice dripping with venom. "That is Greg's bastard. Do not ever speak to me again. Do not look at me. If you ever come near my property, I will have you arrested for extortion." He did not even look at the baby. Jamal spun on his heel and sprinted toward the stairwell, punching numbers into his phone and screaming for his defense attorney before the heavy fire door even slammed shut behind him. Jada was left standing entirely alone in the center of the VIP lounge. The grand illusion she had orchestrated to secure her place in high society had collapsed, leaving her with absolutely nothing. No rich husband, no wealthy lover, no luxury penthouse, just a crying infant and the crushing weight of public humiliation. "Ma'am," my lead security guard said, stepping forward with his hand outstretched toward the exit. "It is time for you to leave the premises." Jada swallowed hard, her shoulders trembling. She pulled the blanket tighter around the baby and began the long, agonizing walk down the corridor. The entire hospital staff was waiting. Nurses, orderlies, and attending physicians had gathered behind the reception desk. These were the same people Brenda and Tasha had belittled all morning. The same staff they had treated like personal servants, snapping their fingers and demanding premium service because of the Ellis family name. Now those nurses stood in complete silence, watching the disgraced mistress walk out under security escort. There were no whispers. There was only the heavy, judgmental silence of working-class professionals watching arrogant frauds get exactly what they deserved. I turned my attention back to the floor. Brenda Ellis was still on her knees. The matriarch of the family had not moved a single inch. She stared blankly at the empty space where her son-in-law had just been arrested and where her son had just abandoned his wife. Her pristine image was completely dismantled. Dr. Sterling walked silently back into the lounge. He did not say a word to Brenda. He simply approached me, handed me a crisp white folder bearing the hospital's financial seal, and walked away. I opened the folder, scanned the bottom line, and let out a soft breath. I stepped forward and dropped the folder directly into Brenda's lap. She flinched, looking down at the heavy cardstock as if it were a bomb. "What is this?" Brenda whispered, her voice completely broken. "I told you I was the bill collector," I said, looking down at her ruined hair and smeared makeup. "That is the itemized invoice for this weekend. The VIP maternity suite, the premium catering you ordered for your friends, the emergency expedited genetic testing, the private neonatal specialists. It comes to exactly $150,000. Brenda's eyes widened in sheer panic. "I cannot pay this. You know Gregory handles all the medical expenses. You just said his accounts are frozen." "Gregory's accounts are frozen," I agreed smoothly. "But Gregory did not sign the financial guarantor paperwork when Jada was admitted." "You did. You wanted to impress the hospital administration. You wanted everyone to know that Brenda Ellis was personally sponsoring the birth of her new grandson. You signed the binding financial liability forms yourself." Brenda let out a ragged gasp, her hands shaking violently as she opened the folder and saw her own signature on the bottom line. "Your son is facing a massive civil fraud lawsuit," I reminded her, pacing slowly around her kneeling figure. "Your daughter's assets are seized by the federal government. Your son-in-law is going to prison. You have absolutely no one left to bail you out, Brenda. You are legally responsible for a $150,000 medical bill for a baby that does not even belong to your bloodline." I stopped pacing and looked down at her one last time. "I expect the balance paid in full within 30 days, I stated, my voice echoing with finality. "If you default, my collection agency will place a lien on your primary residence. Have a safe drive home, Brenda." I turned my back on the weeping matriarch, adjusted my suit jacket, and walked out of the VIP lounge. The Ellis dynasty was finally completely erased. I did not linger to watch Brenda cry. There is a very specific, undeniable kind of power in walking away while your enemies are still bleeding, knowing you do not need to stick around to watch the final drop fall, to know you have won. I turned my back on her weeping, crumpled form and walked deliberately across the polished marble floor. I straightened the lapels of my tailored blazer, feeling the crisp, expensive fabric settle perfectly against my shoulders. The air in the corridor already felt cleaner, completely stripped of the toxic, suffocating arrogance the Ellis family had always carried with them like cheap perfume. I stopped at the main reception desk, where Dr. Sterling was standing quietly observing the aftermath of the absolute hurricane I had just unleashed on his ward. I extended my hand. He took it with a firm, deeply respectful grip. "Thank you for your impeccable professionalism today, Doctor," I said smoothly, my voice calm and perfectly leveled. "Your discretion in handling this incredibly delicate matter is deeply appreciated. I will personally ensure the hospital board hears about your excellent leadership in managing the maternity wing under such unusual duress." Dr. Sterling nodded respectfully. "It is our job to protect the truth and our patients, Ms. Ellis. Have a safe journey home." I turned to the two massive security guards who had flawlessly executed my orders and kept Jamal pinned to the floor when he tried to resort to physical violence. "Thank you, gentlemen," I added, giving them a curt nod of approval. "Your handling of the situation was exemplary. Your premium bonuses will be reflected in your next pay cycle." I walked to the end of the hall and pressed the glowing silver button for the private VIP elevator. The heavy steel doors slid open instantly, with a soft, melodic chime. I stepped inside and turned around just as the doors began to close. My final view of the Ellis family was Brenda. The untouchable matriarch was still a pathetic, sobbing heap of ruined Chanel on the floor, completely alone, clutching a six-figure medical invoice that was going to bankrupt her. The heavy elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of her pathetic weeping entirely. The profound, beautiful silence of the descending elevator was the best sound I had ever heard in my entire life. 1 month later, that exact same beautiful silence greeted me as I stood in the center of my new penthouse. The morning sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm golden glow over the imported hardwood floors. The quiet hum of the city traffic buzzed hundreds of feet below me, a distant reminder of the world moving forward. I stood barefoot in my silk robe, holding a mug of freshly brewed black coffee, letting the steam rise against my face as I looked out over the sprawling, limitless city skyline. I walked over to the pristine marble kitchen island and picked up my tablet. I swiped the screen open, bypassing my personal emails, and navigated directly to the morning financial news. There, dominating the front page of the Digital Business Journal, was a sprawling, bold headline that made me take a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my coffee. "Disgraced real estate titan denied bail in sweeping federal fraud case." The article detailed Greg's spectacular, completely unavoidable downfall. The federal prosecutors had used the completely unredacted forensic audit my team provided to secure a massive multi-count indictment against him. Greg was currently sitting in a federal holding cell facing up to 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The judge had deemed him a severe flight risk due to the offshore accounts and categorically denied his bail. His real estate empire was entirely liquidated by the government to pay back the furious investors he had stolen from. Tasha, true to her predictable self, preserving nature, had immediately filed for a highly publicized, ruthless divorce the very next morning. But her aggressive legal maneuvering was entirely useless. The federal asset forfeiture laws had seized absolutely everything. Tasha was legally stripped of the Hamptons house, the luxury cars, and the massive joint bank accounts. She was currently living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment she had to rent under her maiden name, entirely cut off from the high society circles she used to terrorize. I scrolled down the digital page to the secondary articles, finding the local court updates section. Tech entrepreneur files for Chapter 7. Bankruptcy following explosive divorce ruling. Jamal was entirely ruined. When I reopened our divorce case, using the irrefutable evidence of his hidden offshore accounts, the presiding judge had absolutely excoriated him in open court. Not only was Jamal ordered to pay me full financial restitution for the marital assets he had fraudulently concealed, but the judge slapped him with massive, crippling punitive damages for committing blatant perjury. Because the offshore funds were directly linked to Greg's embezzlement scheme, the federal government had swooped in and seized whatever was left. Jamal went from driving imported sports cars and wearing custom-tailored suits to riding the public bus in a matter of weeks. His fake tech startup was dissolved. His rich friends completely abandoned him the second the fraud went public. He was legally bankrupt, professionally blacklisted, and socially exiled. And then there were the women. Jada had completely vanished. The second she realized neither Greg nor Jamal had a single penny left to fund her luxurious lifestyle, she packed her bags and fled the city with the baby. The luxury penthouse she had been living in was seized by the bank, and she was forced to disappear back into whatever quiet, miserable life she had come from. As for Brenda Ellis, the reality of her choices had finally caught up to her. Just 2 days ago, I received a formal notification from my legal team. Brenda had officially listed her pristine historical family estate for sale. She had no other choice. She had to completely liquidate her primary residence just to satisfy the crushing medical lien my collection agency had placed on her assets after she defaulted on Jada's astronomical hospital bill. The great Ellis legacy, built on arrogance and stolen money, was officially foreclosed. I set the tablet face down on the cool marble counter. For years, I had allowed those people to make me feel small. I had spent countless family dinners shrinking myself, biting my tongue, and trying to fit into their incredibly narrow conditional version of worth. I had let Brenda and Jamal convince me that I was lucky to even have a seat at their table. I smiled, looking around the breathtaking penthouse I had purchased with my own money, funded by a healthcare technology company I had built from the absolute ground up with my own intelligence and relentless hard work. I did not need a seat at their table anymore. I owned the entire building. I turned away from the marble island and walked toward the custom climate-controlled wine cellar occupying the far wall of the penthouse. I reached for a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, the dark, heavy glass cool against my palm. I uncorked it with a swift, practiced motion and poured the rich ruby liquid into a crystal glass. The sound of the wine filling the glass was the only noise in the immediate space, a quiet rhythm of absolute luxury. I took a slow sip, letting the complex, bold flavors ground me in the present moment. "You look like a woman who just successfully foreclosed on a dynasty." The deep, warm voice came from the hallway behind me. I turned to see Marcus leaning casually against the doorframe. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his tie loosened, watching me with a look of profound, unwavering admiration. Marcus was not threatened by my ambition. He did not need to diminish my light to make himself feel visible. He was a brilliant venture capitalist in his own right, an equal partner who stood entirely beside me rather than trying to stand on my shoulders. I offered him a genuine, unburdened smile. I handed him a second glass of wine as he walked over to join me. "The federal indictments were unsealed this morning," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the tablet I had left on the counter. "And Brenda Ellis officially listed the family estate for sale." Marcus stepped close, wrapping his free arm around my waist and pressing a soft kiss to my temple. "You warned them, Kendra. They just lacked the intelligence to listen." I leaned into his embrace for a brief moment, drawing strength from the steady, genuine affection he offered. Then I turned my attention to the sunken living room, just a few steps away. The space was bathed in the warm, ambient light of the setting sun, illuminating the faces of the people gathered around the massive oak coffee table. This was my executive team, my inner circle. Sarah, my brilliant chief operating officer, was laughing at a joke David, my lead forensic accountant, had just made. Next to them sat Elena, the razor-sharp corporate attorney who had meticulously filed the emergency motions to seize Jamal's hidden assets. They were not just employees. They were the brilliant, fiercely loyal foundation of the empire I had built. They had worked 80-hour weeks right alongside me, completely dedicated to the vision of our healthcare technology firm. I walked down the 2 steps into the living room, Marcus right beside me. The conversation naturally quieted as they looked up, their faces reflecting the exact same triumph that was currently running through my veins. "I want to propose a toast," I announced, raising my crystal glass. The team immediately stood up, raising their own glasses, giving me their complete and undivided attention. I looked at the diverse, brilliant faces surrounding me, feeling a surge of absolute power and profound gratitude. For years, I was told exactly what my place was supposed to be. I began my voice steady, carrying the weight of every hardship I had completely overcome. I married into a family that demanded absolute subservience. They looked at a successful, educated, driven black woman and decided my only value was to be a silent, compliant prop in their grand illusion. They expected me to shrink. They expected me to swallow their insults, endure their constant disrespect, and carry the weight of their generational dysfunction with a polite smile. David nodded slowly, his expression entirely serious, knowing exactly the financial rot he had uncovered beneath the Ellis family's pristine social mask. Society loves to tell black women that our greatest strength is our ability to endure pain. I continued pacing slowly across the imported rug, locking eyes with every person in the room. We are expected to be the mules of the world, carrying the burdens of broken men and toxic families, constantly surviving but never thriving. The Ellis family thought I would simply absorb their betrayal. Jamal thought I would walk away from our marriage broken, destitute, and humiliated. Brenda thought her aristocratic pedigree gave her the permanent right to use me as her personal scapegoat. I stopped pacing and stood perfectly still in the center of the room. But they made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. I offered a cold, razor-sharp smile. They forgot who they were dealing with. Sarah raised her glass slightly higher, a look of fierce pride illuminating her features. I refused the script they handed me. I stated, my voice echoing with undeniable authority. I refused to be the angry, discarded ex-wife. I refused to be the tragic victim of their deceit. I did not just survive their betrayal. I monetized it. I weaponized every single lie they told. Every time Brenda belittled my business, I worked harder to expand my portfolio. Every time Jamal hit $1, I built a corporate acquisition strategy to seize 10 more. I gestured toward the massive windows showcasing the illuminated city skyline. I bought the elite financial firm that audited them. I legally absorbed the very buildings Greg thought he was using to bribe me. I dragged their hidden offshore accounts directly into the blinding light of a federal courtroom. I took the ashes of their lies, their fraud, and their fake legacy, and I used them as the mortar to build a kingdom. The room was completely silent. The sheer magnitude of the victory hung in the air, a testament to the absolute destruction of the people who had tried to bury me. We did this together. I said, my tone softening as I looked at the incredible people standing with me. You helped me tear down a fraudulent dynasty and replace it with a company built on actual integrity, actual innovation, and undeniable excellence. To Vanguard Financial, to our future, and to building our own tables. To building our own tables, the team echoed in unison, the sound ringing out with absolute joyous triumph. The crystal glasses chimed together in a beautiful, resonant clink. I took a sip of the vintage wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The room instantly filled with genuine laughter, the sound of people who respected each other, supported each other, and celebrated true success. I stepped back towards the window, looking out over the sprawling city that now belonged to me. Marcus stepped up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his presence a steady, comforting anchor. They told me leaving me was the best decision he ever made. Looking at my empire today, I couldn't agree more. True power doesn't come from begging for a seat at a toxic table. It comes from building your own empire. Kendra's journey teaches us that surviving familial betrayal is only the beginning. By monetizing her pain and weaponizing the absolute truth, she transformed from a scapegoat into a conqueror. Never shrink your brilliance to comfort those who actively pray for your downfall. When abusers finally show their true colors, let them burn in the fierce fire of their own making. Drop a comment below if you have ever walked away to build your own table, and hit that subscribe button.